Chapter 99, Seal Soldier, Layered Wave. The white fire rain that was covering the sky gradually started to gather, merging into a white pillar of rain. The rain pillar shook, creating sprays, one wave after another, like an enormous white snake shaking in the sky, continuously shaking its body to attack that red umbrella. The power kept on gathering, kept on increasing. If it was said that it had been the rain hitting idly the banana leaf before, now it was a storm, the intensity having multiplied. Sleeve umbrella was still a one-use talisman in the end. It had not been nurtured for a long time. At this time, it couldn't bear the attack anymore and scattered with a boom. Great Sun Moon Wheel wasn't a defensive talisman in the first place and was even weaker, basically torn to pieces. The Sky Net was also shredded by countless sword energies. The questions relating to the power of talismans were extremely complex. Other than their grade, it was also connected to the time the Shouja spent imprinting on the talisman. Usually, the longer they spent imprinting on it, the talisman would be more nimble and easier to control. The power would also be greater. This was why talismans had to be nourished. Other than this, some Shouja who were skilled in seal formations, as their cultivation increased, they would forge the seal formations inside the talisman. Like Suomo's water drop sword, if it landed on Xian Yen Sherbua's hands, and was reforged, it could easily rise to 4th or 5th grade. But with Suomo's pitiful cultivation, he didn't have the power to control it if it was 4th grade. It wasn't always, the higher the grade, the better the talisman. It depended on whether or not the talisman was suitable. The 4th grade, Yang Emperor sword, that Lin Yuan had was able to be controlled by Zhuji cultivators and was a very rare specimen. The benefit of a one-use talisman was that it did not need to be imprinted to be used. However, its power was far from the same grade talismans that had been nourished for a long time. People only had limited amounts of time and energy. The more talismans they had, the less they could spend imprinting on each talismans. Consequently, a true expert wouldn't have an abundance of talismans. They would only focus on imprinting a few and rely on those for most of their fights. If they could not easily manipulate their talismans in battle, it was an easy opportunity for their opponents. Talismans could aid or subdue each other. There were many patterns involved, and it was hard for people to predict all the situations encountered in battle. If they could stock up on a few one-use talismans that did not need to be imprinted, they would get a few more choices. It was the same rationale with paper seals. However, it was extremely rare for someone to use talismans and paper seals to such an extreme as Wang Shixiang. In the eyes of truly powerful experts, one-use talismans could work in an emergency, but it was too weak. In the lower-level fights, this kind of expendable strategy would almost always win. It was a pity that he had encountered Suomo who had comprehended sword essence. Sword moves that had sword essence as the core, the power would increase and would surpass the cultivator of the same power level. Only now did Wang Shixiang suddenly realize in shock that the white flame falling from the sky was not fire, nor rain, but sword energies. He almost could not believe this discovery. A guy in Zhuji, how could he give such a terrifying sword move? But in front of this many people, would Wang Shixiang be content with surrendering like this? He had his own pride. Red flashed through his eyes. He gritted his teeth. All in. A gold paper seal instantly appeared on his hand. Seal Soldier. Someone from Lingying's sword sect who had been spectating shouted in shock, causing the crowd to rumble. Everyone's eyes were instantly attracted by the little gold paper seal. For the first time, Chang Shixiang had a serious expression. Among the crows, there was also a pair of eyes which suddenly became bright in the shadows. Chang Shixiang seemed to have perceived it, turning to glance over the crowd. Yan Mingzi muttered dazedly, "This is a seal soldier." Hu Shan gaped, speechless. The families of most Lingying set disciples were wealthy. Their experiences and knowledge wasn't something a poor guy like Suomo could compare with. Zuemo might not recognize what this seal soldier was, but listening to the shocked murmurs of the crowd, he also knew that it was something magnificently powerful. However, at this time, his chest was filled with the sharp sword essence and he could not retreat. Wang Shixiang's face was solemn, his fingers moving, and his mouth quickly recited, "Powerful warrior protects master." As he finished speaking, a golden-armored soldier 3 zhang tall appeared beside him. The features of the golden-armored soldier were not clear. His entire body was enveloped inside the golden armor. He was standing without a weapon, but a heavy killing aura swept the whole field, and people couldn't not help but be in awe. The golden-armored soldier, as it appeared, turned his head up towards the white rain snake in the sky, his hand pushing up, and boomed, "Ah!" Everyone felt their ears ring, like someone had taken a hammer and gave a blow to them. Everyone was shocked. Even Chang Shixiang, who had been calm all this while, slightly changed his expression. It was like the mighty white water pillar met an invisible barrier and splashed in all directions. Wang Shixiang, who was positioned underneath it, was untouched. Zuomo's chest felt like it was hit. He grunted. A sweet fishy taste spread out in his mouth. He could help but be aghast. What was this? At this time, he could not retreat. He refocused and once again attacked. Pew! Wang Shixiang, who had been standing underneath the golden armor soldier, suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. The golden armored soldier towering over him wavered and then vanished like it was an illusion. I lost. Wang Shixiang's face was as pale as powder. He clearly had been wounded. He staggered as though he could collapse at any time. Zuemo finally released a breath. This fight had been really dangerous. If the other had used the paper seal at the start, he would have been the one to lose. His eyes couldn't help but look at the gold paper seal that had landed in front of Wang Shixiang. The gold of the paper seal was much duller than before. This seal soldier can only be used one more time. Knowing what Zuemo was thinking, Wang Shixiang said. Then I'll take it. Zuemo said unhesitatingly. Even though he didn't want to have a grudge with the other, but the impression that this seal soldier gave him was too deep. He had never seen such a powerful, terrifying paper seal. Wang Shixiang didn't waste words. He threw the seal soldier to Zuemo and then a jade scroll. This is the spell for the seal soldier. Zuemo carefully took the seal soldier and jade scroll. This seal soldier was something that could protect his life. Jingshi was important, but his little life was even more important. Something that could protect his life, the more he had, the better. This guy called Wang might be a bit of a prodigal son, and was of few words, but Zuemo felt he was much easier on the eyes than Lin Yuan. Wang Shixiang walked back among the disciples. He didn't have the energy to mind anything else, dropping to the ground, and sat cross-legged. His wounds were not insignificant. This battle had really been a series of up and downs. The people who had watched were also alarmed and shocked. Wang Shixiang's loss had caused many of the Lingying sect disciples' faces to turn ugly, especially the 2 that were up next, whose faces were like dirt. They were far from being as strong as Wang Shixiang, and had less Jingshi than him. Just at this time, Chang Shixiang, who had been placed at the end, walked out. The Lingying sect disciples who had been making a commotion instantly quieted, their eyes looking straight at Chang Shixiang. Zuomo's expression changed slightly. He just had received light internal injuries. This guy named Chang, it could be seen he wasn't a simple character. Was it that he couldn't wait any longer? Chang Shixiang suddenly turned, beckoning at the 2 who were up next, "Come here." The 2 exchanged a look, hesitated but still forced themselves to walk over. "You 2 do not have to fight, you aren't a match," Chang Shixiang said serenely. Turning, he said to Zuemo, "Pick 2 items." Zuemo was in a daze. Looking at the 2 people, he couldn't help but hesitate. Chang Shixiang turned his face back, his eyes landing on the 2. The two were like frightened rabbits, hurriedly saying, Chang Shixiang can make the decision. Zhuo Mo was not polite in demanding a belt and a pair of vambraces from the two. They were pretty good among third-grade items. The two did have pain on their faces, but obediently took it down, handing it off to Zhuo Mo. When Zhuo Mo took them, Chang Shixiang said to Lin Yuan, 1, Red Flower Dan, 3rd grade. Lin Yuan grimaced. Without a second word, he took out a 3rd grade, Red Flower Dan, throwing it to Chang Shixiang. Chang Shixiang then threw the 3rd grade, Red Flower Dan, to Zhuo Mo, heal yourself first. Finishing, he sat down himself to rest. Zhuo Mo wasn't sanctimonious and shoved the Red Flower Dan into his mouth. Up to now, this 3rd grade, Red Flower pill, was the highest grade Ling Dan that he had ever consumed. It turned into a hot stream, spreading through his organs, extremely comfortable. He didn't dare to slack off, channeling Ling power to dissolve the power of the medicine. There was a strange silence. It was like the peace before the storm, making people feel suffocated. Yan Mingzi said in a low voice, let's move back a bit. Hearing this, Hu Shan and Tao Zhuer also were startled awake, hurriedly falling back about 7 zhang. There were many people who also had the same idea as them. All the Lingying sect disciples seemed to understand each other and all moved back. The only people standing in their original spots were Wen Fei and a few others. The surrounding Xiuzhe watched this migration. However, they did not move. They felt that the distance right now was enough to be safe. Ha, they'll regret it later. Yan Mingzi mocked. Yes, the horror of Chang Shixiang, you would only believe it after you experience it personally. Hu Shan said empathetically. Who do you think will win? Tao Zhuer asked. Do we need to even discuss it? The scalping zombie might have some skill, but can he compare to Chang Shixiang? Let's hope that there won't be any blood. There isn't anyone here that could stop him. Terror filled Yan Mingzi's eyes. Should we back up a bit more? Yan Mingzi shuddered and couldn't help saying. That's true, Yan Mingzi nodded. Do you have the spirit traveling seal? I have 2. Hu Shan took out 2 spirit traveling seals. Give me 1. Yan Mingzi hurriedly snatched one, holding it in a death grip. At the side, one person couldn't stop himself. Do you have to exaggerate so much? Hasn't Chang Shixiang been relaxing and cultivating his personality? Yang Mingzi, Hu Shan, and Tao Zhuer first paused and then all had sympathy on their faces as they looked at the person. The person couldn't bear the three's gaze, his face flushing. Chang Shixiang is always writing sutras every day. I've seen it myself. He also raises Ling beasts, so dumb. Yan Mingzi shook his head. Idiot. Hu Shan rolled his eyes and spat out. Let's move back a bit more. Tao Zhuer directly disregarded the person and said to the other 2. At this time, Zhuo Mo finally stood up. Chapter 100, Bloody Changheng. The moment Zhuo Mo stood up, Chang Shixiang opened his eyes and also stood. I am Changheng. Changheng made a simple introduction. It looked as though he was talking of daily life with a friend. I am Zhuo Mo, Zhuo Mo warily answered. For some reason, this Changheng that didn't show any signs of power made him feel pressure. A kind of pressure that he had only felt from Wei Xing Shixiang. Taking the chance, he closely examined the other. A short pale green and grey robe that had faded from washing. It was abnormally different among the magnificent brocades of the Lingying sect disciples. A round face, short hair, the hair like wires, each strand sticking up. You surprised me, Changheng continued. I heard that your Shixiang Wei Xing had comprehended sword essence but hadn't thought that you also had comprehended sword essence. A rumble instantly sounded from the surroundings. They might have inexperienced eyes and did not see Zhuo Mo's true power, but everyone knew what comprehending sword essence meant. The faces of Lin Yuan and the others relaxed. To say nothing of anything eyes, it wasn't an embarrassment to lose to a genius who had comprehended sword essence. Even Wang Shixiang, who was sitting on the ground, couldn't help but shake his head with a bitter smile. If he knew that Sui Mo had comprehended sword essence, he definitely wouldn't have stepped out to fight. Everyone's eyes as they looked at Sui Mo were completely different, full of awe and respect. Of course, there was also some jealousy and envy among those. Sui Mo shook his head. I can't compare to Shixiang. He was extremely shocked inside. Chang Heng could tell his power level with a look. His own cultivation definitely wasn't weak. You do not have to be too modest. Chang Heng carelessly waved his hand. I will find Wei Xing in the future. Seeing the other speak so carelessly of Wei Xing, Shixiang, Sui Mo was very uncomfortable inside and snorted, let's compete first before saying so. Chang Heng shook his head, you are not a match for me. How would you know before we try? Sui Mo said, discontent. I'm on the verge of becoming Ningmai. Chang Heng's light words made Sui Mo speechless. Sui Mo had to admit that Chang Heng was right. The cultivation between them differed too much. His cultivation had grown furiously, but it was only the 4th level of Zhuji right now. The other was on the verge of Ningmai, which was the 10th level of Zhuji. Even though he had once won against a Zhuji Xiuzhe when he was a Lianqi, but he was very clear that half of the reason could be attributed to his opponent. His opponent now was Chang Heng. Sui Mo couldn't help but glance at the other. The steadiness of the other's attitude, and the oppressing pressure made him believe the other was very strong. Sui Mo's battle experience was now extremely rich. What people he could fight, what people he should avoid, Sui Mo was very clear. I surrender. Which item do you want? Sui Mo blurted out very quickly. He had come for wealth. Now that he had made so much, even if he surrendered this one, he had already won 4. Such rich prizes, he was already content. From a glance, it could be seen that he wasn't on the same level as Chang Heng and definitely had no chance of victory. It would be better to admit defeat. If he was wounded by the other, then he would have a deficit. As a businessperson, a sense of when to retreat was essential. Sui Mo comforted himself. Chang Heng started at Sui Mo for a beat and smiled, you are a smart person. I just know my limits, Sui Mo said as he raised his hands. He wanted to leave very badly. The longer he stayed, the more he felt this mediocre-looking man was dangerous. Chang Shixiang can pick whatever item you want. This little brother will present it with both hands. Chang Heng was not moved, his eyes looking in the distance, indifferently saying, if you can survive one of my moves, then leave with the things. If you can't receive it, then leave behind everything. Sui Mo's heart jumped. The easier Chang Heng talked, the more unsafe he felt. Chang Shixiang, this little brother, the place I stand, you have to abide by my rules. Chang Heng didn't turn his eyes. The surrounding crowd were silent. Even the air seemed to become dense and murderous. Everyone couldn't help but stop breathing. They all knew that the most spectacular part of the day had arrived. All of the Lingying sect disciples were excited. The dominance that Chang Heng Shixiang displayed totally conquered them. Even Tao Zhu Er's large eyes didn't want to leave Chang Heng Shixiang's body for an instant. Up until now, Chang Heng hadn't displayed any power, and didn't make any motions. However, he was like the owner of the land, extremely matter-of-fact, and unable to be doubted. Sui Mo took a deep breath. He realized that he could not avoid this fight. The request the other gave was not outrageous. He only had to endure one of the other's moves, and it would count as Sui Mo's victory. If he didn't agree, then all the victories he had today would instantly turn to dust. The other had enough reason to surrounding him. The move that Chang Heng used was the one that Sui Mo used before. He first put himself at a disadvantageous position, and then forced the other to walk the path he picked. This feeling, it really was bad. Sui Mo shook his head, and threw these distracting thoughts to the back of his head. Today's battle, it was all on this one move. However, even a Ningmai cultivator, they shouldn't be able to say they could get rid of him in one move. Since he could not avoid it, then come. Thinking it through, Zuomo adjusted himself into position and said calmly, as Shixiang wishes. Not bad. I like you, Changheng nodded in praise. He then opened his clothes, revealing a bare upper half. In between his clavicles, there was a copper ring. What was that for? The Xiuzha in the surroundings were also puzzled. They began putting their heads together and discussing it. It was the complete opposite of the Lingying sect disciples. Excitement was on all of their faces, each one arching their necks, staring tightly at Chang Shixiang as though some exciting thing was going to happen. Zuomo was also slightly puzzled, but he kept his guard up, not daring to slack off. Changheng closed his eyes, his right hand touching the copper ring between his clavicles. Then he did a move that shocked everyone, he slowly pulled on the copper ring. Hiss. Connected below the copper ring was a blood-red blade. It was slowly pulled out of the flesh of Changheng's chest. There wasn't any pain on Changheng's body. Quite the opposite, his expression was slightly warm and intoxicated. Zuomo's hairs stood as he looked at the weird and bloody picture in front of him. Not just Zuomo, but almost everyone in the surroundings had a terrified expression. Some that were less brave already had run to the side and started to heave. Too savage, Yan Mingzi trembled, saying with excitement. When this blood-red sword was completely pulled out of Changheng's body, the terror reached the bones of every single person. This was a very strange sword. The sword was not long, about 1 qi long, 2 fingers wide. The body was entirely blood-red. There was no sword guard or grip. The blood-red blade connected directly to the copper ring. The width of the ring was just enough to be worn on the fingers. What was strange was that there was no wound on Changheng's body, the spot between his clavicles was smooth and markless. The scene was just a man holding a slightly strange red flying sword, but anyone who had seen what had preceded it definitely would not be able to forget it. Such a weird and bloody scene. Changheng opened his eyes, his expression normal. His voice hadn't changed at all compared to before. This ring sword is called, Blood Spider. Zuomo felt his skin prickle. As though he was facing a great enemy, his hands as they held the sword couldn't help but start sweating. If the pressure that Changheng had given him before could be said to be faint but omnipresent. Then the Changheng with, Blood Spider, on his hand gave him an ocean of pressure, without any place for him to escape. The sudden change in pressure could cause those who had weak minds to collapse in that instant. Zuomo had a feeling that everyone in front of his eyes gradually became dyed with a layer of blood red. Zuomo reflexively tightened his grip on the water-drop sword. The sword suddenly passed him a warm and serene water essence. Even though it was extremely faint, at this time, it dramatically decreased his nervousness. No. If this kept on going, he would lose without even fighting. Zuomo closed his eyes and stopped his breathing. Then he started using embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. The Ling power in his body started to move, and his consciousness started to become lively. Gradually, the terror in Zuomo's heart started to decrease. His fretful heart gradually became serene. At some time, a bloodline appeared in Changheng's eyes. He gave a praising glance at Zuomo. In the eyes of other people, this look caused a coldness to spread from the bottom of their hearts, like a savage blood spider coldly focusing on his prey. He lightly swung his finger. The bloody spider sword, on his finger spun rapidly, creating a bloody red circle of light. As the blood spider sword spun faster, it started to ring. Gradually, the ringing became an extremely icy hiss. An extremely domineering and savage presence, with Changheng at the center, appeared. At this time, the spectators nearby had pale faces. They all wanted to turn and escape. However, they found that their legs were wobbly. Crash, crash, they all fell to the ground. There was only someone wearing a black gauze hat standing at his original spot. His clothes flapped in the wind, but the gauze in front of face didn't move at all. What could be barely made out through the gauze was a pair of narrow and knife-sharp eyes. Zhuemo felt that he was in a sea of blood. Enormous blood waves roiling and howling, smashing against each other, blocking out the sun. He was like a little boat, extremely small, floating uncertainly as though he would be swallowed by the gigantic waves at any instant. Suddenly, a blood wave rose in front of him, transforming into an extremely ugly blood beast, opening his jaws and howled as it leapt at him. Gripping the water-drop sword, having stopped his breathing and closed his eyes, all of Zhuomo's Ling power had all been sent into the water-drop sword. The water-drop sword was like a little river, waves rippling, changing constantly. As the gigantic mouth was going to swallow him, he slowly raised the little river in his hand. The little river that had been the water-drop sword suddenly changed. Flames rose out of the water, spreading a shocking cold. The short little river moved and swayed like the tide. If Zhuemo could see it, he would find that the present appearance of the water-drop sword was the same as the sword river in his consciousness. Blossoms of water-shaped flames, as they spat, they would also create countless icicle-like sword energies. The movement of the tide continuously became larger, the water-shaped flames burning fiercely, the icy energy rising. It was as though Zhuemo was holding a ball of flame in his hand. All the clothing on his body turned to pieces. With an angry shout, using all the energy in his body, from the bottom rising against the current up, he forcefully sliced. The first time after he merged the sword essences, Li water burning heavens. Chapter 101, All In. A handful of glowing water jumped like a fire, the fire turning from clear to a deep blue, a faint mist surrounded the flame, shooting upwards. Changheng gently threw out the blood wheel that was rotating on his hand. The moment the blood wheel left, everyone felt their eyes darken. The blood wheel turned into a ball of blood mist, heading for Zhuomo's head. The blood mist that boiled restlessly was like a strange beast, occasionally giving a low howl, like there were countless ghosts shrieking and screaming, shaking the souls of listeners. The blue fire-carrying mist and the blood mist smashed together. Ding! A crisp sound like that of an icicle rang out. Immediately after, countless howls and screams came out of the blood mist. The spectators felt their eardrums hurt. The people who were close had blood streaming out of their ears. Pew pew pew. The blue flame continuously released countless tiny sword essences. Anytime the blood mist neared, it would be frozen by the icy and sharp sword essences into tiny red ice drops. The sword energies of the blue flame seemed to be endless. Having been wounded, the restless blood mist was like a provoked beast, even more furiously boiling. The shrieks coming out of the blood mist even more piercing and furious. The center of the blood mist seemed to suddenly collapse. The blood-colored mist started retreating at an astounding speed. In the blink of an eye, the 10-zhang-wide blood mist had disappeared. On the empty ground, there was a blood-colored spider. The spider was slightly taller than Zhuemo, and had numerous black patterns all over its body, which seemed like character seals. Big and small reverse hooks covered the spider's legs, gleaming with a cold light. Anyone who saw them did not doubt that if they were caught, flesh would be easily ripped out. The eyes of the spider, each the size of 2 fists, stared emotionlessly at Zhuomo's. Zhuomo's heart was shocked. The blood spider in front of him didn't have the powerful presence of the blood mist before it, but it made him even more wary. However, at this time, his heart was completely filled with sword essence. Even if he was facing a terrifying blood spider that he had never seen before, his mind had never wavered. Seemingly feeling the resolve in Zhuomo's heart, the blue flame, carrying along its mist, turned into a stream of light, shooting at the blood spider. The blood spider suddenly lifted its head, and opened its mouth. A piercing and dissonant shriek flooded from its mouth. With it as the center, the air seemed to have been pulled, and rippled, visible to the naked eye. The flame that had turned to a stream of light suddenly brightened. The mist that surrounded it became denser, speeding up even more. With the flame as the center, countless tiny sword essences crisscrossed, forming a shapeless sword essence net. Zhuomo's body slightly wavered, shocked inside. The shout from the blood spider actually could harm his spirit. If his spirit wasn't much more powerful than normal Xiuzhe, he would have been greatly wounded by that. The surrounding Xiuzhe were much worse off. Most of the Xiuzhe that had been lying on the ground paled. Their consciousness were greatly wounded. Only the Xiuzhe that was wearing a hat was not moved, seemingly unaffected. Lucky we went back far enough. The Lingying sect disciple that had been objecting to Yang Mingzi and the others was full of relief. Even though they were far enough away, but he still was affected. His chest seemed to be roiling and wanting to throw up. His eyes as they looked at Chang Shixiang instantly filled with awe. No one paid attention to him. Yan Mingzi gaped. Pointing at Chang Heng, he suddenly turned his face to ask, who said Chang Shixiang was relaxing and cultivating his mind. Hu Shan and Tao Zhuer looked in shock at each other. Chang Shixiang's power, compared to a few years ago, was even more terrifying. The battle had reached the climax. The blood spider didn't dodge. Instead it raised its head and reached with its forelimbs to slice at the water drop sword. The stream of blue flame that was the water drop sword accurately hit the blood spider's forelimbs. The moment the two impacted, a thick bloody light rose around the blood spider, sheltering it. The blue flame sword essences hit the blood light around the blood spider, icy spraying but basically unable to break its defense. Boom! The true body of the blue flame directly hit the blood light. The blood light, which hadn't moved at all before, suddenly started to shake. The bloody light moved relentlessly as though it could shatter at any time. Arg! The blood spider gave a sky-shaking howl, its voice filled with fury. The blood light around its body suddenly increased, the thick blood light seeming composed of countless amounts of fresh blood, so congealed it seemed real. Zhuomo instantly felt the pressure increase. The pressure in front of the water drop sword was so great that he had never felt it before. It was like murderous intent was hitting in from all directions. The water drop sword was like a fish caught in a net. At this time, Zhuomo didn't have any other thoughts. Jingshi, talismans, they were all thrown out of his head. In his eyes, there was only the blood spider and the water drop sword. The Ling power furiously moved. He didn't need any benefit or simulation. The blood spider gave Zhuomo a pressure of death that he had never felt before, forcing him instinctively to use his full power. He forgot this was a spar, forgot the agreement of one move. All the Ling power in his body was channeled into the water drop sword. The flood of battle spirit, and the terror of death at the bottom of his heart, entwined like twins, deeply provoked Zhuomo. All of his calmness, all of his intelligence turned to dust at this time. What remained was the most basic instincts, the instinct to fight, the instinct to live. At some unknown time, Zhuomo suddenly floated into the sky. The next scene struck everyone completely dumb. What is that? Yang Mingzi stammered to ask. Hu Shan's face was full of shock, unconsciously muttering, "It isn't possible, this isn't possible." Tao Zhuer's face paled like paper. Wang Shixiang, who had been sitting, suddenly jumped up, looking in disbelief at Zhuomo. The expression on Wenfei, who had been watching attentively, suddenly changed. Lin Yuan, not far away, also stared in shock. The black gauze of the hat-wearing Xiuzhe who had been standing steadily rippled fiercely, like a furious wind blew past. Even Chang Heng, who was coldly standing behind the blood spider, showed shock. The Ling energy surrounding Zhuomo as he floated in mid-air, headed for Zhuomo at terrifying speeds. He was like a whirlpool, crazily absorbing the surrounding Ling energy. In reality, the Ling energy at the gates of Lingying sword sect wasn't dense. However, the suction inside Zhuomo's body was too powerful. After he sucked in the Ling energies in the surroundings, he started to pull on Ling energy from further away. This kind of rough suction of Ling energy, no one had seen it before. Even more, this was sucking in Ling energy as he fought. This was too fantastical. Zhuomo didn't know the shock he gave others. Right now, he was like a beast at death's edge, all of his attention on the blood spider in front of him. He put all the ideas he could think of into use. Gambling everything. He completely disregarded the tearing pain from his channels. Without calculating the consequences, he furiously took in the surrounding Ling energy. The blue flame became even brighter. As the impure Ling energy was sent in, it didn't burn quietly anymore, but with crackles and bangs. If the blue flame had previously been as quiet as a virgin, then the present flame was like an infuriated brawny man. A sliver of fear came through the blood spider's eyes, but it quickly became even more furious. This average little boy in front of it dared to repeatedly challenge its dominance. It had even been, for one moment, afraid of him. He was completely infuriated. A row. The size of the blood spider exploded. In the blink of an eye, it had increased multiple times. Standing there, it was like a little mountain. The blood light on its body turned from light to dark. It was like there was a thick layer of congealed blood covering its entire body. Occasionally, dark red blood would drip to the ground, sending up wisps of green smoke, a burnt hole appearing on the ground. Everyone knew that the battle had reached the most crucial time. Suddenly, one red light and one blue light moved at the same time. They chose to use the most straightforward and brutal way, like two raging bulls, crashing together. Boom! Everyone felt a blinding light and couldn't not see anything else. The ground under their feet shook. Other than feeling fear, they hurried to steady themselves. Before they could open their eyes, they heard Zhuomo's voice come out of the air. Chang Shixiang's teachings, this little brother has managed to pass and will bid farewell now. See you in the future. When everyone opened their eyes, where could they find Zhuomo's figure? The last round just now had been too amazing. Almost everyone had lost focus, dumb where they stood. When they regained their minds, and looked towards the field, the blood spider seemed depressed. The several cun deep marks on the two forelimbs were alarming to see. There was nothing remaining of the bravado and fierceness just before. Changheng Shixiang was standing, eyes closed, his legs buried in the rock floor up to his knees. He was motionless. No one dared to go closer. A moment later, a sword light landed from the sky. It was an elder of Ling Ying's sect. He scanned the surroundings. Noticing the wounded and dejected blood spider, his face slightly changed and sternly shouted, "What just happened?" The disciples murmured. Lin Yuan saw the eyes turn towards him and could only go forward to give a simple narration. "Humph, Wukong's sword sect is too bold." The light in this Ling Ying sect elder's eyes grew as he snorted coldly. When his eyes moved towards Changheng that was still motionless with closed eyes, joy suddenly came into his eyes. Just at this time, Changheng opened his eyes, a flash of blood red flashing and disappearing from his eyes. He raised his head and howled to the sky. Wen Fei first paused and then had a gleeful expression. Changheng was extremely refreshed. He had managed to smoothly break through the barrier that he had been stuck at for a long time. Today, he finally entered Ningmai. After a while, he looked in the direction that Zhuomo had disappeared in, an amused expression on his face. The Shilja wearing the hat looked for a moment at Changheng and turned to leave. On the gray-beaked goose, Zhuomo's face was gray. His clothes were covered with blood. He had been gravely wounded in the last round, and had spat blood multiple times. In order to leave earlier, he had forced his Ling power out and relied on it to head straight towards the place he had put the gray-beaked goose. This was why his wounds had been worsened. He only had one thought in his head, to get back even quickly to the sect. Heavily wounded, Suemo felt his body was increasingly heavy. He motionlessly laid on the back of the gray-beaked goose and became unconscious. The gray-beaked goose seemed to know that the situation was grave, powerfully waving the wings and furiously flying in the direction of Wukong's sword sect. Suddenly, a five-colored light lit up on Suemo's chest. Inside the five-colored light, lines of green-colored energy came out and, following the channels in the body, spread into Suemo's limbs and organs. In the consciousness, Pu Yao was looking in interest at this scene. So interesting, I really want to crack it open. Chapter 102, Couldn't understand. Suemo slowly woke up. His face was pasted to the ground, dirt in his mouth. He felt slightly secure once he realized he was in his little yard. When he inspected his body, his heart finally relaxed. The situation was better than he had expected. Even though his injuries were serious, especially in his channels, but it was much better than he had imagined. What he was most afraid of was damaging his basic vitality. That was a fatal wound that even Jindan Xiuzhe could not save him from. Still all right, all right. He struggled up from the dirt floor. He was used to the soreness of his entire body. Thinking about it now, he always ended up causing his own sorry state. If it happened multiple times, then one would get used to it. Even something like enduring pain was like that. However, when he saw the gray-beaked goose splattered like mud lying nearby, he was very shocked. He hurriedly stumbled over. It definitely was this female bird's labor that he could come back. If he didn't have it, he would have been very badly off. Coming to the gray-beaked goose, he carefully inspected her before his heart settled down. This female bird was just exhausted. Suemo was very moved. Running to the stone room, and taking out the stone milk that he treasured so much, he dropped 3 drops to the gray-beaked goose. Silly bird, GE is pretty good to you. Suemo said to himself. For Xiuzhe, using stone milk by itself didn't have much of a beneficial effect, but for Ling beasts, this was a natural treasure. Other than Suemo, no one would feed 3 drops of stone milk to a second-grade gray-beaked goose. From the perspective of Jingshi, 3 drops of stone milk was much more valuable than a second-grade gray-beaked goose. However, this person and bird had great camaraderie. Even though this female bird had once taunted him, but GE is generous, and won't hold a grudge with you, silly bird, Suemo thought. The effect of the stone milk was, as expected, extremely clear. Just seconds later, the gray-beaked goose stood up again, but looking at the gray-beaked goose, like a person, her wings tucked behind her back, puffing up her chest, walking the steps, Suemo was dumbstruck. But it didn't manage to maintain it for very long before it became fretful, jumping about in the yard, jumping up and down. Suemo gaped with wide eyes. But after a while, even jumping would not satisfy it. That pair of wings started to endlessly make strange movements. It looked like a convulsing strange bird dancing. It was really too horrible to look at, no sense of beauty at all. Suemo could only give this cruel review. After thinking slightly, he understood what had happened. He had given too much stone milk to the gray-beaked goose. The potential of the gray-beaked goose was very average, and was not able to tolerate such a large amount of stone milk. Too much of the medicinal power was unable to be absorbed and caused it to act so crazily. Suddenly, Suemo paled. This silly bird was running towards the Ling fields. Stop! Suemo couldn't resist and swore, if you ruin my fields, I'll break your legs. Frightened by Suemo, the gray-beaked goose rushed to a stop and its head plunged into the ground, head down and tail up. It was still slightly frightened of Suemo. When it swayed as it pulled its head out of the ground. Suemo saw the situation was bad and yelled, "Are you dumb? Go fly into the sky." The gray-beaked goose used its wings to hit its head, its face giving an expression of realization. Then it shook its head drunkenly, flapping its wings and staggered as it shot into the air. Suemo patted his chest in fear. These days, even birds were this strong. Having managed to stabilize the silly bird, Suemo dragged his half-crippled body into the stone room. Once he crawled in, he entered meditation. He spent much longer in meditation than before, a full 20 hours before he woke up. Even though he hadn't been wounded too severely, but the wounds in the channels inside his body were not insignificant. The damaging power of the impure Ling energy was extremely serious. At that time, he really had been crazy. For Jingshi, to not even care for his life. However, thinking back to it, he felt that it wasn't right. Why had he been so reckless? He couldn't pin down a reason. That last attack, there were many places for him to savor. He and Changheng were not on the same level of power. It could be seen from the fact the other had forced him to the precipice with one move. Thinking about it now, Suemo still felt fear. It wasn't that he hadn't thought about Changheng's level of power, but he hadn't thought he would have struggled so much to stand up under just one of Changheng's moves. It really was a miracle that he was only wounded this little. He wasn't dejected. From level of cultivation, there was too much of a difference. Changheng was at the peak of Zhuji, someone heading for Ningmai. Suemo was only the 4th level of Zhuji. However, he was now at the 5th level. Just now, after a meditation of 20 hours, he had accidentally entered the 5th level. This wasn't all of the gains from the battle. That was why Suemo wasn't leaving after he woke up, but sitting, savoring the entire battle. The battle had been extremely short, just one move, yet the changes involved were not simple. Quite the opposite, there were many changes that Suemo had never even thought about before. He had even done something as damaging to himself as sucking Ling energy into his body to just barely make it through one of the other's moves. There were too many actions of Changheng that were worth learning from. The precision of Ling energy usage, the attack on the consciousness, the usage of presence and pressure. This meditation was another 10 hours. When he truly finished, he felt that he was extremely hungry. Running to the stores, he found some Ling grains. Not caring about his cooking skill, he personally made a Ling grain meal. The terrible cooking skills caused the taste of the meal to be rather bad. Suemo did swallow up every bit of it. The Ling energy contained in the Ling grains was extremely useful. After filling his hunger, he started to inspect his spoils of war. When he put all the trophies out, he instantly became excited. Moonwater black turtle armor, seal soldier, 1 3rd-grade belt, and a pair of 3rd-grade vambraces. He was familiar with the attributes of Moonwater black turtle armor. The seal soldier could be used only one more time. That was something to use to save his life at a crucial time. Suemo naturally wouldn't be so dumb as to try it out. After memorizing the spell, he carefully put away the seal soldier. The important ones were the belt and the vambraces. Suemo had to admit that he had slipped up on the belt. The gold glittering belt only had one formation, martial bearing. Suemo thought this was a formation that had no use at all. Its purpose was to make the presence of the wearer more outstanding, and look stronger and magnificent. In other words, this was a decorative formation. Suemo wanted to spit blood. He felt that it could be understandable that women would wear talismans of this type, but a guy, wearing a belt carved with, martial bearing, formation in broad daylight, they were too much of a show-off. The belt was made up of soft gold sky silk. The quality was outstanding. Such good material carved with a formation that had no real use, what a waste. Suemo was extremely frustrated. Why did he pick such a useless item? However, what could be celebrated was that the vambraces did not disappoint him. There were 2 formations on it, 30,000 kati, and, nimble fingers. 30,000 kati, was able to greatly increase his power. In the eyes of other shouja, especially sword shio, this might be a useless formation, but Suemo liked it very much. Wasn't it just perfect to match with Vajra Profound Sutra? Thinking about having a pair of dark gold hands with the power of 1,000 caddies, unable to be destroyed, easily breaking down other people's flying sword, Zhuo Mo's heart jumped in excitement. Of course, this was just a fantasy. No one would let their flying sword get caught by another person's hand. However, as a trap, this was still one that people could not defend against. Nimble fingers was a formation that was widely used. Its attribute was to increase the nimbleness of fingers. However, this was not that useful for Zhuo Mo. In low-level Xiuzhe, his finger motions was already very strong. The increase it would give him was almost nothing. Nimble fingers was more effective the less familiar a Xiuzhe was with finger motions. Those that were familiar, there wasn't much of an effect. Okay, people shouldn't be too greedy. Zhuo Mo muttered inside. He needed to go to Dongfu right now, and sell a talisman to gather up the jingshe needed to clear his debts. The belt probably couldn't sell for much jingshe. If it really wasn't enough, he had to sell this pair of vambraces as well. He was slightly reluctant. Vambraces that had nimble fingers on it were easy to buy. What he was reluctant to sell was the 30,000 caddy formation. But he was poor, Zhuo Mo had no way around it. The gray-beaked goose had flown away, so Zhuo Mo could only flip out his flying paper crane. Lil Yellow, it's time for you to perform. Sitting on the paper crane, Zhuo Mo swayed and staggered his way to Dongfu. The outer sect disciples of Wukong's sword sect, when they saw Zhuo Mo riding a paper crane, first paused, and then their faces were full of admiration as they bowed to Zhuo Mo. Did you hear? Xixiang went alone to challenge Ling Ying's sect. 1 against 5 and managed to beat all of them. All of Dongfu has heard it. On the paper crane, Zhuo Mo's body froze and he started to sweat. This rumor. Yes. Such a stunning incident, how could I not have? I heard that there was a 10 zhang tall spider, whose gigantic mouth could swallow a bull whole, so Xixiang used only one move to beat it until it begged for mercy. Sitting on the paper crane, Zhuo Mo almost dropped off. It was more like he had almost begged for mercy. So strong. Look at Xixiang, such a powerful person, and is riding a first-grade paper crane. What is called living frugally? What is inscrutable? This is. Yes. Zhuo Mo finally couldn't bear it any longer and fled. An extremely well-attired middle-aged person was repeatedly examining a soft gold belt, expression excited and heated. Good thing. Really a good thing. TSK, look, this weaving, 72 joyful crane technique, isn't something any master can knit out. Look at the style, the 2 words, extremely noble. Very classic form, won't go out of style for at least 50 years. Soft gold silk is a good material. Gold yet not blinding, bright but not crass. Only this kind of fine material can display it to the best advantage. If it's something lesser, it would be too cheap, and the comfort would be less. Someone who can buy something like this, who would buy it if it wasn't comfortable? See this lucky knot, skilled. Using lucky knots to lock the edge, I've never seen something like it. This time, I've really broadened my visions. This, martial bearing, formation has had great care in it. This position, it perfectly covers the entire body. Wearing it, if you don't look elegant and grand, it must be the base material is terrible. Zhuo Mo dazedly came out of the store, the 100 treasures pouch at his waist full and bulging. He felt like he was in a dream. A soft gold belt carved with a martial bearing formation was actually the most expensive of all these talismans. These days, was it him that was crazy, or them that was crazy? He couldn't understand. Chapter 103, Inspirations. Zhuo Mo had felt before that he had a very good understanding of the world over that last 2 years. At least, he knew the area of Dongfu very well. But when a decorative belt carved with martial bearing sold for such a price, he suddenly felt that there were still many things he did not understand. He quickly recovered from the blow that Jingshi had dealt him. Refocusing, Zhuemo found that there were many more people on the street than before. Strangely and exotically dressed people passed him by, and were clearly not locals. "Bro, there's so many people. Is something big happening in Dongfu recently?" Zhuemo found a shopkeeper that was waving a bell outside. This shopkeeper discreetly swept across the talismans on Zhuemo's body and pushed out a smile, respectfully answering, "Elder may not know. These people have all come for the Dongfu Sword Test Conference. This sword conference has really shook Sky Moon Jie. For the last half-year, almost all of the young experts have gathered in Dongfu." He then made a little flattery, and earnestly said, "This one sees that Elder is young but is powerful. If you go to try, you certainly come out on top." Zhuemo finally understood. So it was the sword test conference. He had heard that Dongfu was planning on holding a sword test conference but hadn't thought that it would be an event of such magnitude. He was very surprised. Having understood the situation, Zhuemo didn't have much interest left. Something like a sword test conference, it didn't have too much to do with him. A place where all the experts will gather, since he was only a Zhuji, there was nothing for him to do there. If Wei Xingxixiang was attending, he would go watch. Other than that, he didn't have any interest. It was more practical to earn Jingshi, and cultivate. He hummed a little tune, sitting on the paper crane and swaying as he flew back to Wukong Mountain. Walking into the little west wind yard, he was struck dumb. A snow-white big bird was standing on his rooftop, posturing. The proudness of the aura, it was like a princess high up, dressing up in front of a mirror. These days, when did birds become show-offs? He seemed to feel that this white bird was somewhat familiar, but no matter how hard he thought, he didn't remember who in the sect would have such an extraordinary-looking big bird. This big bird was entirely snow-white without one feather discolored. The beak was a pure clean sky blue. It looked extremely anthropomorphic, and intelligent. This mount, it definitely would be expensive. Who lost their mount? Zhuemo couldn't help but wonder. The snowy bird that had been posturing saw Zhuemo standing at the door out of the corner of its eyes, and its body froze. Zhuemo caught this little movement. He first paused, and then unhesitatingly swore, "Silly bird, get down." So this was his gray-beaked goose. But, why did it change to look like this? Zhuemo wondered inside. Was this the effect of the stone milk? The snowy bird bashfully came down from the roof, running on front of Zhuemo and rubbed fawningly against him. The hairs on Zhuemo's body stood up. "Stay away from me, female bird." The snowy bird seemed to hurtfully lower its head. "Ah, so the feathers changed. Oh, your body got slightly larger." Zhuemo made 2 circles around the snowy bird. Seeing Zhuemo examining her, the snowy bird instantly puffed up its chest, exuding a proud demeanor. Seeing the snowy bird act like this, Zhuemo was infuriated. He slapped the snowy bird's head, angrily saying, "You almost ruined Ge's Ling fields, did you know that? Ah! I'm telling you, if you dare to damage the Ling fields one bit, Ge will pluck your feathers and cook you." Hearing Zhuemo say, "pluck," the snowy bird was aghast, its pair of wings securely blocking its chest as it stumbled back a few steps. Seeing the anthropomorphic move of the snowy bird, Zhuemo grinned. He really didn't have to argue with a silly bird. Just go somewhere else. Zhuemo threw down these words and then went into his rooms. His life had finally returned to normal. After clearing his debts, the remaining Jingshi had been silently taken away by Pu Yao. Zhuemo could not do anything. Pu Yao was just too skilled. He didn't need Zhuemo's agreement, and it didn't matter where Zhuemo hid it, he could always find it easily, and then unceremoniously take all of it. When Zhuemo found out, the Jingshi had disappeared for a few days. With fury, Zhuemo ran over to talk with Pu Yao. Each time, he was defeated by Pu Yao's indifference. To go from wealthy to penniless in the blink of an eye, Sua Mo wanted to spit blood. However, what comforted him was that, perhaps it was the effect of the Jingshi, the sea of flames inside his consciousness had recovered greatly. Without Jingshi, he couldn't do anything. Sua Mo could only live. The growth of the fiery red flower in the Ling garden was very good. They would be ready for harvest soon. In comparison, the Ling grasses that he had planted in the Ling gardens matured first. This made him very excited. All of these Ling grasses had been planted in preparation for him to make new Dan. He hadn't planned on selling those 20 mu of Ling grasses, it was enough for his own use. After harvesting all the Ling grasses and processing them, he gained such a large amount of Ling grasses that he had to set aside a room specifically to store it. He did not need to go to the Dan room to make Dan anymore. With the stalagmite fire, he could make Dan anywhere. This was also why every person who did Dan making or forging dreamed of having a fire of their own. Adding on the streaming fire core management formation on the jade pendant, the biggest barrier to making Ling Dan for him was his cultivation. The highest Dan medicine that a Zhuji Xiuzhe could make was 2nd grade. If he wanted to make 3rd grade Ling Dan, he must have a cultivation of Ningmai. Without Jingshi, Sua Mo had great motivation. He decided to not leave his rooms, furiously making Dan every day. Bone tempering Dan, evil removing Dan, and spirit increasing Dan. Under his furious efforts, the number quickly increased. The effect of these low-level Ling Dan was not outstanding in any way, but Sua Mo planned on using quantity to overcome quality. Without heed to anything else, he just used up all his materials. 200 bone tempering Dan, 200 evil removing Dan, and 200 spirit increasing Dan. Sua Mo used 3 gourds to store these Dan medicines separately. What amazed Sua Mo was that he had accidentally made 10 2nd grade bone tempering Dan, 8 2nd grade evil removing Dan, and 10 2nd grade spirit increasing Dan. 1st grade was worthless, but 2nd grade could sell for a pretty good price. However, Sua Mo didn't plan on selling even one of them. The Jingshi he would get would all be taken away by Pu Yao. Consuming a bone tempering Dan, Sua Mo started to channel the gravestone version of Vajra Profound Sutra. As expected, a burst of medicinal energy entered his body. Each time that he used an evil removing Dan first before cultivating, some black stains would appear on his body. The effect of consuming spirit increasing Dan was the most evident. Eating it and then practicing embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, he could clearly feel the medicinal energy entering his mind. Seeing that this method was effective, and having so much of the Ling Dan, Sua Mo furiously shoved Ling Dan in his mouth each time before he cultivated. After more than 10 days, there was significant progress with Vajra Profound Sutra. Golden patterns appeared on his chest. If he channeled Ling energy, the water drop sword could not wound him. The progress of his spirit was even more apparent. Without him detecting it, he had reached 4th breath. In the void of his sea of consciousness, 4 stars lined up in a row. This was all from eating Dan. He had ate several dozen of the 1st grade Ling Dan, but no Dan had much of an effect. So he could only eat the 2nd grade Ling Dan. After eating the 2nd grade Ling Dan, he experienced the gigantic gap between grades. The effect of the 2nd grade Ling Dan was more than 10 times the 1st grade Ling Dan. There was about 100 pieces of each type of Ling Dan. They wouldn't sell for much Jingshi if he sold it. It was both obscure and low level, there was no market. He decided to feed the rest of the Ling Dan to the silly bird and the black gold worm. The black gold worm ate Ling Dan like thin crisps, crunch, crunch crunch. The Ling Dan would visibly shrink. Silly bird ate Ling Dan more like it was eating beans, jiebang jiebang. Seeing them enjoy eating so much, Sua Mo would become hungry as well, and ate them as snacks, chewing on them once in a while. After Silly Bird transformed, Sua Mo had pulled it to be assessed. Right now, it was a 3rd grade blue-beaked snowy bird. The value of it had increased exponentially. Right there, someone had asked Sui Mo whether he would sell it, and was willing to pay 200 pieces of third-grade jingxia. Sui Mo was extremely tempted. Seeing the situation, Silly Bird hurriedly ran in front of him and pretended to be pitiful. It even used that pair of wings to pretend to wipe tears. Sui Mo didn't know to laugh or cry. The people in the surroundings were amazed, and thought this bird was extremely intelligent. The price instantly flew to 500 pieces of third-grade jingxia. Sui Mo still refused. He looked at the smug face of Silly Bird and thought to himself. Oh, it wasn't that Ge didn't bear to part with the bird, but if he had jingxia, it would only fall into Pu Yao's hands. All of his attention was on cultivation. At the beginning, he had used the whirlpool ling sucking method to make the yin fire beads and found it very useful. The amount of ling energy taken in was much more efficient than any other scripture. However, the impurities in the ling energy taken in this way was extremely high. If he could think of a way to get rid of the impurities in the ling energy, then his cultivation would increase extremely quickly. He suddenly thought about the process of using the stalagmite fire to make Dan. The stalagmite fire could burn away the unnecessary impurities and provide what he needed. Maybe, he could use the stalagmite fire to get rid of the impurities in the ling energy. The more he thought, the more plausible he found the idea. Without anything else to do, he started to experiment with this strange idea. Sui Mo was never afraid of trying out new things. Like the golden crow pill, like the whirlpool ling suction method, like merging sword essences. No one told him what was possible, so he had to try for himself. In any case, his cultivation was low. Even if he was injured, it wouldn't be too major, he frequently comforted himself with this. There were too many problems involved. Like how to use the stalagmite fire to purify, no jade scroll had ever mentioned that it was possible to use fire seeds to burn ling energy. This process also had to be carried out inside his body. After ling energy was taken into the body, it would pass through the channels. In other words, the setting to forge the ling energy had to be in his channels. Sui Mo was very doubtful and felt that this was extremely unlikely that his fragile channels could contain something as terrifying as the stalagmite fire. Then that led to another problem he had to overcome. He needed to strengthen his channels, making sure the stalagmite fire would not damage his channels. A stream of complex questions gave Sui Mo a headache. He felt that he had no place to start. For some reason, he suddenly thought of Changheng who had beaten him so terribly. The dejection that had come into his heart was replaced by motivation. He gritted his teeth, saying to himself, "Gu holds grudges." Chapter 104, Hesitation. The first problem was strengthening his channels. Only stronger channels could tolerate the stalagmite fire. Otherwise Sui Mo would be frozen into a popsicle by the stalagmite fire. This first problem was enough to trip Sui Mo up. The only scripture that he had related to strengthening the body was Vajra Profound Sutra. The effects of the Vajra Profound Sutra didn't look very bad right now, and Sui Mo tried to find a section on it relating to strengthening channels. He was quickly disappointed. There wasn't too much in Vajra Profound Sutra on strengthening channels. Sui Mo, unsatisfied, ran to the records room, searching everywhere for scriptures that could strengthen his channels. He quickly found related content from some of the body cultivation jade schools. However, he was even further disappointed. Each of the jade scrolls clearly wrote that strengthening channels was a very profound field. Body cultivation first trained the flesh, then the tendons, and then the bones before the channels. With his weak Zhuji cultivation, he couldn't even start to think about it. Sui Mo was not discouraged. This was not the first time he had encountered an obstacle like this. The jade scrolls that he had struggled so much to obtain were unclear in many places. That required him to think about it himself. If one path did not work, he would change to another. He could always find a workable solution. Since it was not possible to strengthen his channels, that meant that he could not carry out his idea of purifying Ling energy in his channels. What about on the outside? If he could purify the Ling energy outside the channels, then the Ling energy he would absorb into his body would become pure Ling power. Suemo sank into deep thought. How could he purify Ling energy outside the body to turn it into Ling power? Inside the body, Ling energy was invisible and non-tangible. How could he purify it? Each question seemed to be beyond his limits, but he did not plan on giving up. For this sword test conference, who are we sending? Yen Lu looked at sect leader Pei Yuan Ran. There was only the two of them in Wukong Hall. Xin Yen was in seclusion forging. Shifeng Rong was in seclusion making Dan. Naturally, Wei Sheng will have to go. I just don't know if he'll come out in time, sect leader said. Sui Mo can also go. Haha, the little guy ran to make a fuss at Ling Ying's sect. I heard he was extremely impressive, Yen Lu smiled. The Ling Ying sect, just by relying on their wealth, had always been extremely arrogant towards the other sects of Dongfu. There were many that thought them an eyesore. Zhuo Mo's talent is not bad. It's a pity he cannot focus on the sword, sect leader said with regret. It could be considered an honorable defeat, that he lost on Chang Heng's hands. Yen Lu shrugged carelessly, it's good even if he does not focus on the sword. In the future, the sect needs people like Sui Mo. Sect leader nodded and did not say anything. He turned to say, you can go take a look at Luo Li. The incident last time really shocked him. He should have improved. Just these three? Yen Lu asked. Just these three, the sect leader added, there's no rush. There's still time until the preliminary sword test conference. Yen Lu excitedly clenched his hands, I'm looking forward to it. If Wei Xin gets out in time, he will definitely shock everyone. The sect leader gave a light smile. Even though he did not say anything, but the flash of light in his eyes revealed his thoughts. The great harvest of fiery red flour once again bloated Zhuo Mo's purse. The price of fiery red flour had risen again during this time, to now 2.5 third-grade jingshi per tael. The 80 mu of Ling Garden had, in total, produced 22 caddies of first-grade fiery red flour. Other than that, there was almost 1 caddy of second-grade fiery red flour. The price of second-grade fiery red flour had grown to 60 pieces of third-grade jingshi per tael. Taking off the previous payment of 60 pieces of third-grade jingshi, in total, Zhuo Mo's income was 1,090 pieces of third-grade jingshi. This was his biggest payout of jingshi yet. To stop Pu Yao from secretly taking it like usual, Zhuo Mo decided to attack first. Based on income, Zhuo Mo definitely was in the high ranks of Dongfu, but all of his jingshi was stolen by Pu Yao before they even got warm in his purse. Pu Yao saw Zhuo Mo's nervousness, and mocked, just 1,000 pieces of third-grade jingshi, it's just 2 pieces of fourth-grade jingshi, do you have to be like this? Zhuo Mo was completely unaffected. I'll exchange it for something. He then added, that I can use. Pu Yao said slowly, haven't you been looking for a way to purify Ling energy recently? Zhuo Mo's mind became alert. Yes. Do you know how? There's nothing wrong with your idea. Pu Yao snickered, but you know too little. Even if you have a good idea, you cannot solve it. I'll exchange for this. Zhuo Mo unhesitatingly said. He. Pu Yao lightly swept his sleeve. A stream of clinks of jingshi hitting each other sounded, but Zhuo Mo did not feel pain this time. He only stared at Pu Yao, waiting for him to keep talking. Then I will teach you. In reality, this is a very simple method. Pu Yao's face resumed its habitual indifference. TSK. Even though your idea is only superficial, but to think of it with your skill level isn't easy. Pu Yao's indifference gradually disappeared without him noticing, his voice becoming serious. Shilja, Yao, Mo, the three of them, the one that has the hardest time to create Ling power is Shilja, seeing Zhuomo's surprised eyes, Pu Yao laughed lightly. You must find it weird, that the Shouja who focus on Ling Power as their primary have the hardest time with Ling Power. No matter if it is Yao or Mo, they are born with the ability to communicate with nature. Like us Yao, once we are born, we can manipulate Ling energy of the world. Mo, their bodies can automatically absorb the Ling energy of the world, and naturally get rid of impurities, that they use to temper their body. They do not need to do anything for their blood and flesh to be filled with Ling energy. Based on natural talent, Shouja cannot be compared to us. However, they are very good at learning. You have practiced many scriptures now. Do you know what is the core of scriptures? What is it? Mo, entranced, asked reflexively. Formations. Pu Yao's eyes became extremely deep, as though he was looking through the ages. Each scripture is a kind of formation. Scriptures, most of them are divided into parts. The first is absorption. If it cannot take in Ling energy of the world, then the scripture is useless. Then it is forging. If it cannot purify the Ling energy, then it is not useful, and would harm the user. After that, it is storage. If it cannot store the power, it's useless no matter how much is absorbed and purified. Mo was dumbstruck. No one had broken down scriptures like this before. Pu Yao stated it so simply, without any part that was difficult to comprehend. Mo finally pondered it, and instantly understood. It really was so. Good scriptures, the efficiency of taking Ling energy is higher, the purification is faster, and it can store more Ling power. It's just this simple. Pu Yao sighed. You must be wondering why us Yaomua can naturally absorb Ling energy. That is because us Yaomua have natural formations in our body. This is a blessing from nature. It is a pity that our intelligence is not as great as Shouja, ignorant of the treasure in our possession. Millions of years, we only knew to act according to our instinct, never thinking of the mechanisms behind it. Only when Shouja started to rise did we start to study, but by that time, we were too far behind Shouja and could only develop in two other directions. Oh, that's off topic. Pu Yao suddenly gave a smile. Let us return to your question. Your problem is easy to solve for all time. How about it, do you want to try? Pu Yao was already extraordinarily beautiful. That smile, it seemed to light up the sea of consciousness. Even Mo was shocked. He was suspicious that, if Pu Yao appeared in Dong Fu, there wouldn't be a woman in Dong Fu that would be able to resist his spell. But, a male growing up to look like this, it really was a crime. What method? Mo asked, slightly hesitant. You had to reverse Pu Yao's words. If he said something like it would be solved forever, then it most likely would be continuously troublesome in the future. Your luck isn't bad. You encountered me, Pu Yao resumed his lazy expression. Didn't I already say to you just now, Yaomua can naturally gather Ling energy and purify it. Coincidentally, this kind of natural seal formation, I have a little knowledge. Such a thing as good as this, how could those experts give up on it? Mo didn't quite believe it. The Yaomua that Shouja had captured could not be counted. If there really was some secret on the bodies of Yaomua, it should have been discovered long ago. Ha! Pu Yao smiled mockingly, they've been angling for this thing for a long time. Pity, nature blessed us Yao with this just so Yaomua will not go extinct. How about it, want to try? How high can it increase? Is there any side effects? Would it conflict with practicing scriptures? Mo asked a string of questions. How much can it increase? This depends on your body. At least, it would be multiple times what it is now. Side effects? Of course there would some. In this world, is there anything that is only beneficial? Losses and gains, I shouldn't have to teach you such a simple tenet. As to cultivating scriptures, it wouldn't affect it, definitely wouldn't affect it. Pu Yao resolutely said. Mo lowered his head, sinking into his thoughts. Pu Yao did not hurry him, idly sitting on the gravestone. For some reason, Zhuai Mo had a feeling that the following decision would change and influence his entire life. He did not know why he would have such a feeling. He had learned many things from Pu Yao, but never had a feeling like this before. This feeling was so strong, so clear. He was hesitant. He had been very happy these recent days. Even though he was still worried about Jingshi, but everything was developing so well. He had improved step by step. Each day was very full. If he kept going like this, he definitely wouldn't have to worry about Jingshi in the future, and could live a very good life. In the sect, he would also have a pretty good position. He could study ling plants, could study dan making, could study. But that repeated dream, like fate, it always seemed to accidentally guide him towards another direction. Changing features and erasing the mind, his body was still carrying a past of unknown hardship and cruelty. Head down, Zhuai Mo's hands fisted unconsciously, his entire body minutely trembling. What was it that he wanted? What was it that he could not avoid? Chapter 105, Mo Matrix and Yao Si. Zhuai Mo looked slightly scared at the variety of ling grasses and strange knickknacks placed in front of him, like 3 sticks of incense made from the ashes of burnt sky net Yao hair, a small bottle of bitter dove Mo blood, a nauseatingly smelly ferret Mo gallbladder. He had bought all those things according to Pu Yao's orders. He ran all over Dong Fu, and made a trip to see He Rong before he managed to gather all of it. These weird things were all extremely expensive. He spent all of the 1,000 pieces of third-grade Jingshi. Pu Yao was strangely generous this time, proactively taking out the Jingshi. These strange materials, they were all parts of some Yaoma's body. The corpses of Yaoma killed in the Yao hunt would be speedily be broken down by skilled professional butchers to useful parts. The bodies of Yaoma were rich in ling energy, and had many wondrous effects, so they were used in great amounts in dan making and forging. The organs and flesh of Yaoma can be added to dan. The hides of Yaoma were usually abnormally strong in good materials to make ling armor. Their teeth and claws could be forged into high-grade flying swords and talismans. In thousands of years, the practice of the Yao hunt had never stopped. Other than revenge, it was mostly motivated by profit. However, the dangers in the Yao hunt were too high and the gains were not much. Therefore, raising ling beasts had become popular. The attributes of ling beasts could not compare to the Yaoma, and the raw materials after killing the beasts were not as high grade. It competed on the numbers and the low cost. Even a small sect like Wukong Sword Sect had its own specialized stables. It could be seen just how widespread raising ling beast livestock was. Pu Yao had high demands for these materials. They had to come from Yaoma and not ling beasts. This was also why it was so expensive. Any material relating to Yaoma were not cheap. But Zhuai Mo looked at the strange things on the table and his heart shook. He felt that it seemed like they were going to hold a dark ritual, and these strange fleshy organs were the tribute. He usually studied formations and scriptures, and it was not as terrifying as this. There's nothing really good. We can only just compromise. Pu Yao said, slightly helplessly. These things, they can just barely create the lowest kind of Mo matrix. Mo matrix? What is that? Zhuai Mo pushed down the terror in his heart to ask. This is very complicated to explain. Pu Yao picked up the materials and inspected as he talked. You can think of them as a kind of formation, a natural formation. It is a formation made out of blood, fur, feathers, and vitality. Humph. Xiuzha always want to decode the mystery of this, but the mechanisms in here, it's not so easy to crack. Then what are we doing now? Don't be dumb, do you have to ask me such a simple question? Pu Yao looked at Zhuai Mo like he was an idiot. Of course it is to make you a Mo matrix. Make a matrix? Mo matrices can be made. Didn't you say no one has cracked it? Zhuai Mo was very shocked. They cannot, that does not mean that I cannot. Pu Yao snorted, and said conceitedly, before, he suddenly seemed to have realized something and closed his mouth. Pu Yao didn't want to say it. Zhuo Mo was curious but he didn't ask. Pointing at another pile of ling grasses, he asked, "These ling grasses? Also for the Mo matrix?" The materials on the table had been clearly divided into two piles, one of ling grasses, another of Yamo parts. "That is to add something else to you." Pu Yao snickered, "A very interesting thing." "Oh." Zhuo nodded, not understanding. Suddenly, he felt his eyelids became heavy, he was so sleepy. "Don't forget. Even in death, you must not forget." He was having a dream again. Zhuo sighed. He was like an indifferent spectator watching his own dream. He knew that it was useless whatever he said, no one would reply to him, or rather, this dream just wanted to give him a question. He was waiting to wake up. When he opened his eyes, he saw Pu Yao's handsome and enchanting face. "Welcome back," Pu Yao said smugly and with deep meaning. Zhuo sat up and instantly felt pain. There seemed to be wounds over every part of his body. He could smell the thick scent of blood in the air. Was it successful? Zhuo was frightened by his own voice. It was completely dry. Success. I'm ashamed to use such good words for this kind of trash. But there's no way around it. You are too poor. What you used were my funds. You have to pay me back soon. Pu Yao said, slightly disdainful. Seeing Zhuo grit his teeth in pain, Pu Yao seemed very happy. I added a very simple Mo matrix to your body. Oh, this matrix, I found it on the body of a copper rhino. It's very primitive and simple. It can automatically absorb in the ling energies from the surroundings and strengthen your body. Your body will appear copper-colored. Since you have been practicing Vajra Profound Sutra, you can use it as a disguise and no one would be able to see it. Zhuo struggled up and instantly became alarmed. Two thick red lines went from the center of his palms, following his arms to his chest and intersecting there. From the chest, they separated again downwards, following his legs to the center of his feet. The intersection at his chest was like the two red lines had made a knot. Seeing Zhuo's wariness, Pu Yao said unconcernedly, "Don't worry, after 2 days, these lines will merge into your flesh. Even if someone has something like sky eyes, they can't see it." Zhuo couldn't help but sigh. If he went about with such an alarming tattoos like this, he wouldn't have good days to live. This Mo matrix is relatively simple, so don't expect it to have many abilities. Pu Yao said irresponsibly. You are just too poor. Without Jingshi, there naturally isn't anything good. Zhuo felt the space between his brows hurt and couldn't help but reach up. When his hand touched his forehead, his fingers seemed to have encountered something abnormal. What is that? Zhuo suddenly remembered that Pu Yao said he was adding something else. A Yao seed. Pu Yao was extremely smug. This thing cannot compare to a true Yao seed, but for you, it's more than enough. Zhuo knew about Yao seeds. Yao had Yao seeds, Mo had Mo cores. This was the standard to judge the importance of Yamo. Shilja would also form gold cores, but this gold core was made from ling energy and was not some tangible object. It would automatically dissipate after death. Yao seeds and Mo cores, they were tangible objects that grew in the body and were an extremely important material. He had only heard of it before, but had never seen it. Yao seeds? Zhuo asked in alarm. What does it do? Just try and see. Pu Yao said. Hearing this, Zhuo hurriedly started embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. As it started, he instantly detected the difference. The ling energy in the surroundings competed to rush into him. All the openings in his body naturally opened, the ling energy easily slipping into his body. His flesh was like a wondrous filter net, easily filtering out the impurities of the Ling energy which turned to sparks of light that then entered his flesh and bones. Sui Mo was slightly dumbstruck. It really was as Pu Yao said, just as easy as breathing. There was none of the usual struggle. The Ling energy seemed very close and intimate with him. He was exhilarated. With the Mo matrix, the speed of his cultivation would multiply. He thought about the Yao seed that Pu Yao mentioned. Even though he did not know what a Yao seed looked like, but it definitely was related to the consciousness. As expected, he quickly found the Yao core on his forehead. It was a blood-red crystal, a bit like the blood crystals on Pu Yao's ears, but in terms of brightness and clarity, it was far worse. What Sui Mo found extremely wonderful was that, with a Yao seed, the shape of his spirit had transformed. His consciousness had been like a ball of mist before. Now, his consciousness was like a jellyfish, having lots of thin slender tentacles with the Yao seed at the very center. These thin spiritual tentacles, with Sui Mo as the center, floated in the surroundings. Everything in the surroundings was clearly mirrored in his mind. After he started cultivating his spirit, his sixth sense had become extremely sensitive. With the Yao seed, this sensitivity had multiplied. His mind moved and those spiritual tentacles nimbly danced around him according to his wishes. Having been worried beforehand, Sui Mo finally could not disguise the glee inside. To say of nothing else, just Dan making, his success rate would definitely improve dramatically. The benefit from these two things, even if he had to pay a price, it was worth it. With the Mo matrix and the Yao seed, the speed of his cultivation would increase multiple times. Just as Sui Mo was celebrating, Pu Yao broke in, "Don't be happy too early. I've never done this Mo matrix and Yao seed to anyone before. If there's any side effects, you just have to deal with it yourself. You need to study formations now. The speed of taking in Ling energy is faster, but if you cannot store it, it's all useless." Sui Mo gradually calmed down from his joy. Pu Yao was right. Right now, the rate of taking in Ling energy was multiple times what it had been, but if he could not solve the problem of storing it, it truly was useless. "Learn formations," Pu Yao said with a rare seriousness. "Right now, you only need to study formations." "Only study formations?" Sui Mo was slightly puzzled. He felt Pu Yao's words were too definite. "Yes," Pu Yao explained. "No matter if it is Dan making, or sword scripture, they are formations in the end. You have to learn on your own. The formations of Xiuzhe are too complex and broad, yet completely different from the understanding of us Yao. We have a hard time understanding many things. You cannot understand them." Sui Mo didn't believe it. Even though he felt Pu Yao was just a dumb Yao, but in the matters of cultivation, one Pu Yao was worth 100 of him. Something that even Pu Yao could not understand, how could he understand it? Extremely rarely, Pu Yao had a grave expression. He said something that Sui Mo did not understand. "It has nothing to do with methods, it has to do with belief." Even though he could not understand it, but Sui Mo felt that Pu Yao was extremely serious when he said this. It should be the most serious thing that Pu Yao had said up until now. He silently memorized this sentence. "Then Dan making? Sword scriptures?" Sui Mo was still slightly hesitant. Pu Yao had finally reached the end of his patience with Sui Mo. "Idiot, they are also formations. Don't be tricked by appearances. In any case, just concentrate on formations." "I don't have jade scrolls," was what Mo weakly said. Pu Yao irresponsibly spread out his hands. "I don't have a way either." Suddenly, Pu Yao smiled darkly. Sui Mo's heart couldn't help but have a bad feeling. As expected, he heard Pu Yao formally say, "All right. I feel there is a need to discuss the matter of my payment." Chapter 106, The Half-Finished Product Processing Maniac. "You know I do not have Jingxia." Sui Mo could only say, "Oh, you can just owe me." Pu Yao said unconcernedly, this time, you spent 2 pieces of 4th grade Jingshi. Oh, adding on my wages, seeing that everyone is so familiar, let's give a discount, just 8 pieces of 4th grade Jingshi. In total, 10 pieces of 4th grade Jingshi. Oh, repay it in 3 months. 1 month over, it will be 2 times the number. Zhuo Mo's limbs felt cold. Pu, this price is too outrageous. Oh, no, I'm a Sky Yao, my appearance fee is very expensive. Pu Yao shamelessly said. 10 pieces of 4th grade Jingshi, that was 5,000 pieces of 3rd grade Jingshi, 3 months. Zhuo Mo felt dizzy. He made one last effort, this is impossible to complete. Oh, don't worry, I like interest. Pu Yao gave an intoxicating smile. In Dongfu, Zhuo Mo sat in the store, all his attention on controlling the stalagmite fire. In that ball of white flame, there was a glowing liquid boiling. A Xiuzhe was standing at the side, not daring to breathe, as he stared nervously at the milky white ball of flame. Suddenly, the stalagmite fire disappeared, a clear medicinal fluid floated silently in front of Zhuo Mo. A fragrance instantly spread out in the air. Zhuo Mo skillfully urged the medicinal fluid into the already prepared jade bottle. When the fluid entered the bottle, he instantly shoved a cork in. Your bell grass fluid, 20 pieces of 3rd grade Jingshi. Zhuo Mo expressionlessly said. Bro, can you be a bit cheaper? This is the 9th time I've come here. The Xiuzhe pleaded. Zhuo Mo raised his expressionless face, my appearance fee is very expensive. The other was speechless and could only painfully take out 20 pieces of 3rd grade Jingshi. Zhuo Mo didn't even look, just shoved it into the 100 treasures pouch at his waist before closing his eyes to recover Ling energy. After a while, he opened his eyes, next one. Li Yingfeng hurriedly let another person in. Ever since Zhuo Mo had come to the store, she was shocked at the popularity of the business. Zhuo Mo Shitty had gotten a strange white fire from somewhere that was extremely icy. Zhuo Mo Shitty had also displayed his business skills. He received all kinds of weird jobs, like purifying and making medicinal fluids, forging certain raw materials. These jobs that she had never heard of before, Zhuo Mo Shitty could do all of them. She quickly found that all the jobs that Zhuo Mo Shitty provided were middlemen jobs such as purification. He actually did not take requests for dan making. She had once been extremely puzzled at this. Zhuo Mo Shitty was most skilled in dan making. Only later did she understand the meaning of it. That was efficiency. Just making the intermediate product, with Zhuo Mo Shitty's terrifying recovery rate, the efficiency was shockingly high. He was like a human-shaped stove, not knowing exhaustion. In comparison, Shitty's terrifying control of fire did not shock her too much. Up until now, Zhuo Mo Shitty had not failed once. Li Yingfeng was amazed but not shocked. Zhuo Mo Shitty was a genius at dan making. It was normal for him to be skilled at controlling fire. His terrifying success rate quickly became famous in Dongfu. Everyone knew that Dongfu had a store called the Wukong grocery store that had a zombie-like guy who had godly talents at controlling fire, and even rarer, it was a white cold fire. The grade of that white cold fire was not high, but it was extremely powerful. The processed products that were created were all of high quality. Cold fire was hard to find in the first place, and the number of Xiuzhe that had cold fire was pitifully few. Usually, a Xiuzhe that had a fire was either skilled in dan making, cooking, or forging. Who was willing to work on intermediate products? A Xiuzhe that only made intermediate products suddenly appearing out of nowhere, the Xiuzhe that had a need instantly flowed in. This person was wearing a hat. When he saw Zhuo Mo, his steps paused. What do you want me to forge? Zhuo Mo said, not even raising his head. 4th grade cold magnet. The other said. Zhuo Mo was slightly surprised. He raised his head to glance at the other and shook his head, I can only process 3rd grade. 4th grade is out of my limits. Please find someone else. Stalagmite fire was only a second-grade fire seed. If it wasn't that his consciousness was strong, and his ability to control fire was high, he could only process second-grade items. Even so, third grade was Zhuomo's present limit. He didn't even need to think about the fourth-grade cold magnet. The other said in a deep voice, "Can you cut this fourth-grade cold magnet into 4 pieces?" Cut. Zhuomo thought and then said, "I can try." The other took out a black stone. Embedded in the rock was dots of blue ice. He handed it to Zhuomo. Zhuomo didn't take it. "The payment will be 200 pieces of third-grade jingsha." "Okay." The other replied simply. "Rich person." Zhuomo's heart was full of disdain, but his hand quickly took this fourth-grade cold magnet. The reason that he had thought of making intermediate products was that he had been forced by the demand for jingsha. After taking on the huge debt of 5,000 pieces of third-grade jingsha, Zhuomo had to work his mind to find ways of earning jingsha. Planting fiery red flower was a pretty good method, but that meant that he had to rent a ling garden 5 times what he had rented before. What he felt helpless about that was, even if he used all the ling farmer spells he had, the growing period of the fiery red flower wouldn't be shorter than 5 months. He unhesitatingly dismissed this plan. If it went over a month, it would multiply. 5 months meant that Zhuomo needed to pay back 20,000 pieces of third-grade jingsha. Without any other way, he could only plan around the stalagmite fire. Hoping that he could earn 5,000 third-grade jingsha by selling Dan in 3 months was not realistic. After he finished learning, it would have been too late. An idea had suddenly sparked and he thought of making intermediate products. He was extremely practiced at purifying and concentrating ling grasses right now. The purification and tempering of forging was not hard to learn. Stalagmite fire was a rare cold fire, extremely suited for processing those yin and cold-attributed ling materials and ling grasses. The number of xiuzha that had fire seeds was pitifully small, those that had cold fire was even less, and Zhuomo was the only one willing to make intermediate products. Originally, this business was not very profitable since it was just for intermediate profits and he could only take the processing fee. However, after getting the Yao seed, Zhuomo's control of fire increased dramatically. The stalagmite fire was almost alive in his hands and the efficiency was astonishing. With the Mo matrix, his ling energy recovery rate was extremely high. After meditating for a little while, he would be back at full power. Zhuomo had not solved the problem of storing ling power. Even though his absorption rate of ling energy had increased and the effects showed in tempering his body, but the increase in his cultivation had been limited. Due to this problem, he had gone to discuss it with Pu Yao many times. There was too much of a difference in the Mo matrix from what Pu Yao had advertised and the reality. Zhuomo had requested a reduction in his debt. In the face of reality, Pu Yao could only admit it and reduce Zhuomo's debt by 1,000 third-grade jingsha. The debts of 4,000 third-grade jingsha caused Zhuomo to take a breath of relief. He quickly found the most effective method of using the Mo matrix. Since its ability was to increase the speed of taking in ling energy, then he would rapidly use up the ling energy, then quickly replenish it. If he repeated it like that, wouldn't it work? He quickly found that the Yao seed with the stalagmite fire was the perfect combination with the Mo matrix. Other than the business being average the first few days, the following days, the business was extremely hot because xiuzha were coming in to Dongfu from the outside to attend the Dongfu sword test conference. Zhuomo's processing fee was not cheap. Basically, it started from 20 pieces of third-grade jingsha. If it was something good, it would immediately jump to 40 pieces of third-grade jingsha. Yelling 200 pieces of third-grade jingsha was just him being outrageous, and he had not thought that the other would unhesitatingly agree. According to his normal income, he would take in, on average, 200 pieces of jingsha per day. According to this speed, he would quickly pay off his debts. This kind of business depended on the time. If this wasn't the time of the Dongfu sword test, just with the local Dongfu xiuzha, it would have been good if he could earn 40 pieces of jingsher every day. However, he had gained quite a lot from this kind of furious labor. He managed to learn and arrange the stalagmite fire into a 3-turn fire formation which could greatly increase the effect of the fire to the point of being able to melt some 4th-grade ling grasses. However, he did not easily take jobs involving 4th-grade materials. The main reason was the risk was too high. If he accidentally ruined someone's material, then he couldn't even pay them back. The price of 4th-grade materials, it was sky-high. This time, the other only asked him to cut the cold magnet. Zhuo felt the risk was not that high. Since the other had not even negotiated on his opening price of 200 pieces of 3rd-grade jingsher, he felt the profit was extremely high. Speaking of sharpness, nothing was as sharp as flying swords. However, some materials could not be cut with flying swords because it would ruin the material. Cold magnet was one of those materials. There were many considerations in cutting a cold magnet. The magnetism was not evenly distributed. It was extremely complicated to try to preserve the magnetism of each piece. However, this was not too hard for Zhuo. The Yao seed seemed to have been born for embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. Even he felt afraid at the speed of improvement in his spirit. After his consciousness became stronger, it didn't require much effort to inspect 3rd-grade materials. It was not that easy for 4th-grade material, but if he used those spiritual tentacles, he could quickly finish it. Other than increasing his control fire, it allowed him to study the material very well, and made him much more efficient at processing it. Since it involved 200 pieces of 3rd-grade jingsher, Zhuo was extremely careful. Each time he worked on a 4th-grade material, it was a rare experience. Closing his eyes, he inspected this middle-sized cold magnet multiple times with his spiritual tentacles. After he was completely certain of the magnet location, he opened his eyes. The black gauze hat-wearing customer only saw Zhuo holding the cold magnet and resting for a long time before suddenly opening his eyes. The cold magnet in Zhuo's hand slowly floated into the air. At the same time, a milky white flame quietly appeared, the surroundings becoming cold. Behind the black gauze, a surprised expression flashed in the eyes. Zhuo sat calmly, no expression on his face. Only that pair of eyes could make others feel his concentration. The pair of hands half resting before his chest started to move and change, stirring a string of afterimages. The stalagmite fire floating in the air turned into an extremely thin white flame thread, swimming around the cold magnet like an extremely slender white snake. Suddenly, the snaking fire thread speeded up. The black gauze hat-wearing customer felt the white fire was like lightning, circling around, the head reaching the tail. A 3-turn fire formation suddenly formed. Chapter 107, Seeing Shixiang again with the 3-turn fire formation forming, the temperature of the room became cold. Even the hat-wearing customer couldn't help but move back a step. The coldness exuded from the roiling fire formation seeped into the bones. 3-turn fire formation was not a complex seal formation. It could increase the power of fire seeds, regardless of if it was cold or hot fire. Each extra turn would double the power. The most Zhuo could complete right now was 3 turns. 4 times the power for him was completely enough. His eyes focused, all of Zhuo's consciousness was awakened. Even though he had a Yao core now, and his spiritual control had increased, but the difficulty of a 3-turn fire was still high for him. Using his consciousness to carefully control the stalagmite fire, he felt the Ling power inside his body disappear at an alarming speed and the exhaustion that accompanied it. Zhuo suppressed it, carefully controlling his consciousness. With a light hiss, the cold magnet fell down in 4 pieces. Zhuo released a breath. 200 pieces of 3rd-grade jingsher. Speaking of it, a person's limits was a very scary thing. Not long ago, his yearly income was just a few dozen 2nd-grade jingsher. In the turn of an eye, his one-time income was 200 pieces of 3rd-grade jingsher. Just based on income, Zhuo Mo definitely had entered the levels of high earners in Dongfu, but he had never felt that he was wealthy. Quite the opposite. He found that he seemed to have sunk into a strange cycle of lacking money more and more. He obviously was earning increasingly more jingxi, but he was eternally penniless. It was better even now, he had shouldered huge debts. However, he quickly released it. These days, what things were free? He had already gotten a cheap bargain. If there wasn't Puyao, he might not have these debts, but he would not have embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, no Yin fire bead, no stalagmite fire. He might not even have successfully entered Juji. Success. Zhuo Mo handed the 4 pieces of cold magnet to the customer. The hat-wearing person took the cold magnet and praised, "Brothers was control of fire is truly amazing." He then crisply paid 200 pieces of third-grade jingxi. "You are too complimentary." The majority of Zhuo Mo's attention was on the 200 pieces of third-grade jingxi, and he responded absent-mindedly. "Is Brothers were going to register for the sword test conference?" The other seemed to want to have a discussion with Zhuo Mo. No. Zhuo Mo didn't have the time to talk with the other. The 3-turn fire formation had almost cleaned out all of his Ling energy just now. Even though the Mo matrix was continuously strengthening his body, he still felt uncomfortable. After getting the Mo matrix, Vajra Profound Sutra had improved the fastest. In a short period of time, Zhuo Mo had reached the 3rd level of Vajra Profound Sutra. When he channeled it, even the flesh under his skin started to have dots of gold. This was the golden flesh clothing. Vajra Profound Sutra was not a quick scripture. According to what was written, people usually had to practice for 5 or 6 years in order to reach the 3rd level of golden flesh clothing. The 4th level, red lotus flowing gold, needed 10 years. After reaching golden clothing of flesh, the defense strength rose. The entire body would be like a piece of gold, very hard to cut with a normal flying sword. Zhuo Mo's body was much stronger than before. But for some strange reason, his physique was still thin and weak. Adding on his trademark zombie face, he was easy to recognize. The Ling power that the 3-turn fire formation had taken was too much. He desperately needed to recover now. Seeing the other did not seem to want to leave, he had to raise his head. "Do you have something else?" "Ha, I'll come find Brothers Wa in a few days." The other laughed before leaving. Zhuo Mo was too lazy to pay attention, closing his eyes to start embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. A while later, his mind had recovered. At the side, Li Yingfeng saw his state and hurriedly yelled, "Next one." Other than jingxi, Zhuo Mo gained many other things. The requirements of each customer were different. The things he needed to process and make were different. On average, he would have to process around 10 strange things each day. Some were Ling grasses, some were ores, someone had even taken out a snow bear Yao gallbladder. Just Ling grasses, he had processed no less than a few hundred types these few days. His experience had grown and it would be great help for him in dan making. He celebrated making the decision before. If he was in the sect, he wouldn't have seen so many Ling grasses, much less the rarer specimens. It was a pity that the stalagmite fire was a cold fire, and could not process many things. Most of the materials he encountered were Yin and cold. What? You can't make it? If you can't make it, why are you opening shop? A man was holding a 3rd-grade fire jade, swearing. "I have a cold fire. It is not suited for fire and yang materials." Zhuo Mo said calmly. "Damn, you wasted my time, you have to pay me for my losses." The other's voice suddenly stopped. He looked at Zhuo Mo with a face full of terror, frozen to his spot, not daring to move. Zhuo Mo serenely took back his sword essence. "I'm sorry. Why don't we both pardon each other?" It was not the first time something like this had happened. Zhuo Mo was more experienced now. The man didn't say anything before leaving, crestfallen. Time was important. Mo could deeply feel the importance of time. An inch of light was an inch of gold, there was nothing more true than this. Fragrant fall leaves, lotus texture branch, lapis lazuli light stone, eternal river stone. After a whole day, Mo worked until his mind was numb. He finally couldn't persist anymore, yelling, "Everyone, come tomorrow." According to the line, Li Yingfeng gave each person a wooden card carved with a number. The lineup tomorrow would start according to the number on the card. Mo released a breath. He really made a profit today. A gigantic order worth 200 pieces of third-grade jingsha, it was a whole day worth of work. As usual, he gave Li Yingfeng a third-grade jingsha. This was for the sect since he was borrowing the shop from the sect. After 7 or 8 days, he would be able to clear this enormous debt. That made him feel much better. Just going to rest, Mo heard a call from behind him, "Shitty." Mo stopped in his steps. Turning, he saw Wei Shixiang standing outside the doorway to the store. "Shixiang." Mo happily ran out. Wei Xing seemed a totally different person than when he had bid farewell last time. Even though he was still wearing a short worn tunic like before, but the sharp sword essence that swarmed restlessly around his body last time had completely disappeared. Wei Shixiang's appearance was average in the first place. With this attire, he didn't have any presence. His entire person seemed like an extremely normal low-level shouja. From this, it could be seen that Wei Shixiang's cultivation had increased greatly. Very quickly, Mo became even more shocked. Wei Shixiang had broken through to Ningmai. His consciousness was extremely sensitive and he had fought with Chang Heng who had been on the verge of Ningmai, causing him to instantly detect it. How was this possible? When Shixiang had gone into the sword cave, now he had successfully entered Ningmai. Mo had thought that his own progression could be considered monstrous and that had been because Pu Yao was there. But Shixiang, when Mo had gone to the sword cave with Pu Yao before, he hadn't found anything special about it. Shixiang was a true genius. Mo had heard all kinds of praises these days and became alert now. He only had happiness in his heart. He felt that Shixiang's achievement was extremely natural. If a person like Shixiang was buried and unknown, then it would be strange. When did Shixiang come out? Mo asked dumbly. He suddenly thought of something. "Shixiang, I entered Juji." Li Yingfeng heard the noise and ran out. Seeing Wei Xing, a happy expression came onto her face. "Shixiang." Wei Xing first greeted Li Yingfeng before his eyes landed on Mo and forthrightly laughed, "Let's go drink. Us brothers will drink until we are drunk." The night was like water, dots of starlight scattering. Wei Xing and Mo were sitting on the rooftop, the wind blowing as they gulped down alcohol. "This isn't bad. Where did Shitty get this?" Wei Xing could help but take a few more mouthfuls. Mo was already slightly tipsy. This is Wang Xiao's alcohol." Wang Xiao wanted to buy Golden Crow pills. "Since Shixiang came, how can there be no alcohol? I went to get some from him." "Ha ha. This is nice, nice." Wei Xing leaned back and swallowed. In the yard underneath, Li Yingfeng kept on shaking her head. Wei Shixiang who was usually so calm, and Mo Shitty who usually was so wooden and indifferent, once they drank alcohol, they seemed to be completely different people. Shixiang managed to be in time for the sword test conference. "There's so many people this year. I saw many strong people these days." Mo slanted his eyes and drunkenly said, "However, Shixiang needs to beat them all, beat them into the ground." Looking at the charmingly pleasant Mo, Wei Xing roared with laughter, "Yes. Beat all of them." Mo snickered and swallowed some more alcohol. Holding the jar, he suddenly became silent. Detecting Mo's abnormality, Wei Xing asked concernedly, "Shitty has something on your mind?" "Shixiang, what do you think people live for?" Suemo asked after a beat. What do people live for? Wei Xing automatically straightened his spine, his eyes looking into the distance. I do not know what other people live for. My thoughts are very simple. I want to see what this sword, when it reaches the extreme, looks like. Sword at the extreme. Suemo muttered. His eyes also looked into the distance. Sitting on the rooftop, they could see the night scenery of Dongfu, the distant lights, and the barely perceptible calls. He shook his head. Before, I wanted to live better, so I studied ling farming. But now, I want to become strong. Become strong? Wei Xing turned his head and said in surprise, why? There was bitterness in Suemo's voice, to find what I have lost and cannot forget. He didn't tell Shixiang that his features had been changed and his mind erased. If Shixiang knew, he would be furious. There was no need to make Shixiang also unhappy over his own personal matters. Wei Xing comforted him, don't rush, Shitty. You will eventually remember your past. Everyone in Wukong Sword Sect knew that Suemo had amnesia. Wei Xing assumed that Suemo was depressed over that today. Haha. Yes, what would come will always come. Today, it is the reunion of us brothers. I really shouldn't say such depressing things. Let's keep drinking. Suemo raised the alcohol jar and swallowed. Ha. Wei Xing also gave a wide smile and raised the alcohol jar. Drink. Chapter 108, Two Paths. Wei Xing. Shixiang left Dongfu early in the morning. Suemo resumed his furious life of making jingshe. It really exceeded my expectations. You actually managed to repay all of it in such a short amount of time. Pu Yao said with slight regret. Suemo felt his entire body was light. The enormous debt had given him great pressure these past days. He asked about another problem. Pu, has there been any new developments about storing ling power? Pu Yao shrugged, nope. The rate that Suemo absorbed ling energy was multiple times faster than before, but strangely, if the ling energy that was absorbed was not quickly used, they would gradually dissipate, and could not be stored inside. For any Xiuzhe, the amount of ling power represented their cultivation. If they didn't have ling power, basically, they could not cast more than 70% of all spells. The higher the spell, the more ling power it required. He was very suspicious it was caused by the Mo matrix that Pu Yao had carved into his body. He could clearly feel the difference of progression in his cultivation after the Mo matrix was carved. He was extremely worried. Pu Yao, if I cannot store ling power, it's hard for my cultivation to increase. If my cultivation cannot increase, he wanted Pu Yao to recognize that this was a serious problem. Pu Yao was unconcerned. What does that have to do with me? I delivered the product. You Ren Yao. Suemo instantly exploded due to Pu Yao's terrible attitude and started swearing, lying to me about this Mo matrix and Yao seed. Now, you put out this disgusting demeanor of not caring. In the future, don't think about getting one piece of jingshe from Yi. I can take it myself. Pu Yao was not angry and giggled. Suemo smiled angrily. From today, Yi won't take one jingshe, only items, jade scrolls. Go take it. Yi will see where you take it from. Oh. Pu Yao rubbed his chin as he talked to himself. That is a problem. Suemo smiled coldly as he looked at Pu Yao, wanting to chop this androgynous guy into meat dross. This dross. False prophet. Greedy, dishonest, immoral, evil pervert. Pu Yao innocently spread his hands. I hadn't thought this would happen either. Things like formations, they are too complex for us Yamo. However, there isn't anything that cannot be solved in this world. I can help give you ideas. It can be free this time. Suemo suppressed the impulse to tear apart this guy, asking, keep going. Look, since the growth of your ling power is slow now, you can work from two different areas. Pu Yao's thin lips bent into a curve. One is to work at the root. Your body is like a complete formation. If one attribute has changed, then it is definitely that a part of the formation has changed. You only need to find the cause of the change to be able to correct the formation, and the cause will be resolved easily. How can I find it? Suemo had to admit that what Pu Yao said was very reasonable. I can't help you there. In any case, you have to work through seal formations. You Xiuzha are much better than us Yaomua at formations. Pu Yao said, shaking his head. After all this, he just spoke useless words. The rage inside suddenly shot up. Rather than wasting your time complaining about things that have already happened, it would be better to start studying early. Pu Yao snickered. These words instantly extinguished Suomo's rage. Pu Yao was right. Since it was like this already, then complaining about something that had already happened was just wasting time. He raised his head, and the other area? Oh, that one's much easier. Since your cultivation is growing slowly now, why don't you increase your control over Ling power? Smugness flashed through Pu Yao's eyes. If you can precisely control every strand of Ling power, the same amount of Ling power, you can use it to cast more spells. Don't envy other people for having more Jingshi, you just have to use each Jingshi on the edge of the blade. Precise control. Suemo instantly understood. When he had been in Lianqi, this had been a question that he would frequently ponder because he needed to cast, little art of cloud and rain, for many Ling fields. Just like Pu Yao had said, he needed to use every single drop of Ling power effectively. However, after he entered Juji, his life had quickly become wealthy and he had gradually lost sight of this problem. Right. Like the processing and purification you have done these days. You need to be sparse in using Ling power. Something that can be done with one strand of Ling power, you should not use two. When you can precisely control every strand of Ling power, you will find that you only need a tiny bit of Ling power to cast a spell that you used to need lots of Ling power to do. Pu Yao added, most wealthy tycoons, when they started, they were like this too. The previous length of words, Suemo had uncontrollably been enhanced and changed. Pu Yao's figure suddenly seemed much larger. But with the words he added after, he instantly shrunk back. Pu! This scum! As the victim, Suemo was seething with righteous fury. His mind, however, kept on pondering what Pu Yao had said. Li Yingfeng found that Suemo's shitty situation these past days was not normal. The speed he worked clearly had slowed down, and after each job, he would sit there in a daze. He was like a completely different person than before. Was it that he had made enough Jingshi? She couldn't help but think. Shitty should take a rest. These few days, no one was clearer than her just how much Jingshi Shitty had earned. Even now, she almost couldn't believe that this wooden and cold Shitty had such a terrifying ability to make Jingshi. The Jingshi he had made by himself was worth 5 months of the gross income for the stores she was managing. This was an extremely shocking number. If Shitty was in Ningmai, she wouldn't find it so strange. But he was only Juji. She had never heard of a Juji disciple that could earn so much. Maybe, Shitty was a genius too. Very quickly, her thought seemed to have been proven. Shitty still took business, but he did not accept Jingshi, only jade scrolls for payment. However, what she found strange was that Shitty seemed like any other jade scroll collector, accepting all kinds of jade scrolls, as long as he had never seen it before. After observing for a few days, she found that the jade scrolls that Shitty liked best were formations. Shitty was really smart. She praised silently. Their sect was a sword shio sect. The most they had were sword scriptures, and the rest were pitifully little. With Shitty's intelligence, he was suited for studying formations. It would be of great benefit to his dan-making in the future. She had a feeling that 4th Shirgu may not be able to teach Suemo Shitty anything in the future. At Suemo Shitty's age, 4th Shirgu wasn't this strong. Formations was necessary knowledge for all cultivators. It was the most basic of all basics. Dan making, forging, Jinji, all of them were connected to formations. This was something everyone knew, but even if they knew, if they didn't have the conditions, they could not learn it. Wukong Sword Sect was not some rich sect. Where would they get the wealth to collect these jade scrolls? She suddenly felt it a bit pitiful. If Shitty was in a large sect, he might be even stronger. Sky Fragrance Liquid. This is the limit of what I can process it. Suemo tiredly handed a small jade bottle to the customer. The customer hurriedly took it. Taking out the cork, an expression of joy made its way onto his face, and he praised, "Master's was spell is really amazing. Spectacular." He carefully put the jade bottle away and then bid farewell before rushing away. Suemo did not stand, but took out the jade scroll that he had just received. He couldn't help but feel slightly uplifted. To process that sky fragrance liquid, he had really done everything he could to barely process it and received this jade scroll in payment. He did not know which sect had passed down this jade scroll. It seemed quite old. There were 3 formations inside, all of them extremely special. Pu Yao came out. He was extremely dissatisfied with Suemo's recent actions. "I told you 2 paths. You aren't following the rules." "Really?" To have tripped Pu Yao up, Suemo felt extremely good. He slowly put the jade scroll away and glanced at Pu Yao, saying, "Did we have an agreement? I am going according to what you pointed out. You told me to study formations, but you don't have any formations jade scrolls. So I have to get them myself." Pu Yao paused. He finally remembered that they really didn't have an agreement last time. He suddenly raised his head to smile. Right, he, looking at Pu Yao's dark smile, a cold feeling rose in Suemo's heart. Don't be afraid. To get one over this Renyao, it's worth it even if GE will suffer a bit. Suemo hurriedly comforted himself. After Pu Yao disappeared, Suemo quickly sank back into his work. In this period of time, his control of Ling power had increased quickly. After Pu Yao pointed out the problem, he started to pay attention to his technique in this area, becoming even more miserly in using Ling power to process materials. However, even though he progressed quickly, he was still unsatisfied. It was still hard to avoid wasting Ling power in unnecessary places. He quickly found the crux of the problem. To be able to perfectly use Ling power, it was impossible to achieve it just by relying on the precision of using Ling power. It also required having a deep understanding of the formations used. Only when the two were both present would the use of Ling power be most efficient. Because he only took jade scrolls in payment, Suemo's business received a bit of side effects. But the people who came to him were mostly Zhuji Xiuzha of some skill. They usually would have 1 or 2 pretty good jade scrolls. Quickly, the customers knew that Suemo preferred formation jade scrolls. They would try to pick 1 or 2 quality jade scrolls. Suemo's actions were not strange. The stronger the Xiuzha, especially Xiuzha in non-combat professions, when their skills grew, their need for Jingshi would increasingly become smaller. These kinds of skilled craftsmen, they usually would have many weird and strange demands. Demands like jade scrolls or rare materials were actually the most common. Even though he took fewer jobs than before, but the number of jade scrolls that Suemo possessed grew at an astonishing rate. These jade scrolls came from all areas. The great majority were normal things, but there were a few of high quality. The jade scroll he had just received was one of those. Suddenly, Li Yingfeng walked to Suemo's side with a weird expression and whispered a few words to him. Chapter 109, Inky Black Lotus Seed, 3 Ningmai Xiuzha have come. Li Yingfeng's words made Suemo pause. 3 Ningmai. Since Suemo had started this business, it wasn't that there wasn't Ningmai who had come. The hat-wearing person who needed the cold magnet cut last time should have been a Ningmai. Zhuemo loved it and hated it when Ningmai came to him. What he loved was that the payment they could give was far higher than normal people. What he hated was the things they needed him to process would be of high difficulty. High difficulty meant high risk. If it failed, Zhuemo could not afford to pay his debts. As to not paying, he didn't even need to think about it. The other's power was much higher than him. If a conflict happened, the one that would lose would be him. Now three had come together. Humph, a Zhuji guy dare to posture in front of us. Provoke me, I'll burn this place down. Third brother, don't speak nonsense. The voices passed clearly from the door. Clearly, the three people were starting to be dissatisfied. Zhuemo felt the start of a headache. He could only pass, please come in. The three people walked in. The one at the front was a red-robed male, striding confidently and projecting an aura of power. At his left was an eagle-nosed male, expression dark. It could be seen with a glance that he wasn't an easygoing person. On the right of the red-robed male was a brawny man whose face was set in a snarl. His body was like a mountain of meat. When he came in, he started to look everywhere. Greetings to Master Zhuo. The red-robed leader had a slight smile as he saluted with folded hands to Zhuemo in a bow. Greetings to the three elders. Zhuemo didn't dare to posture, standing and raising his folded hands to return the greeting. Seniority among Xiuzha was extremely complex and hard to manage, so most of the time, everyone measured according to cultivation. Zhuemo's cultivation was one stage lower than the other, so he was naturally a junior. The three seemed to be extremely satisfied with Zhuemo's attitude. Even the dark face of the eagle-nosed man relaxed slightly. Master Zhuo is too courteous. The red-robed male smiled, stating his purpose, coming here, it's because we have something to ask. Following, he took out a lotus seed that was entirely black. This fourth-grade inky black lotus seed has an extremely hard outer coat and cannot be cut open by flying sword. Coming this time, it's asking Master Zhuo to take off the outer coat. We have heard about Master Zhuo's rules, and this jade scroll is a complete set of sky ring moon sound formation. This formation is the finest among fourth-grade formations and has many special attributes. We heard that Master Zhuo likes formations. This sky ring moon sound formation will be payment. But I'll say the ugly first. If you ruin it, I won't forgive you. The snarling man rumbled. Third brother, don't speak nonsense. The red-robed man reproached. He turned to say to Zhuemo, Master Zhuo, don't listen to him. You just have to focus on processing it. Looking at the three, Zhuemo's back had already been soaked in sweat at some unknown time. These three were all very powerful. Zhuemo wouldn't be a match for even one of them. The three of them together, he wouldn't even have the chance to escape. Having climbed up from an outer sect disciple, he was very good at perception and knew that none of these three were good people. Don't see that the red-robed man spoke so friendly, but if he really ruined the inky black lotus seed, he definitely wouldn't have a good ending. Zhuemo's consciousness was above other people. There was an energy of blood fiends surrounding the three. Even though it was not as terrifying as the blood fiends he saw in the sword cave, but they exuded an extremely faint viciousness. The three used some unknown method to disguise the energy of the blood fiends, but how could they conceal it from Zhuemo's consciousness? This business was not an easy one to take. This was Zhuemo's first response. He shook his head, my sincere apologies for having the three elders come here for nothing. This one is only in Zhuji, and my fire seed is only second grade. The fourth grade inky black lotus seed really is not in my abilities. His words were sincere. He was not afraid that the three would inspect his cultivation fire seed, so he was extremely honest. The red-robed man smiled slightly but did not speak. The eagle-nosed man beside him said darkly, if you can process fourth-grade cold magnet, how come you cannot do a fourth-grade lotus seed? The snarling large man widened his bell-sized eyes, unreasonably stating, I'm telling you, if you are working, you have to take it, if you are not working, you still have to take it. Otherwise, I'll tear down your little shop. The red-robed male chuckled and presented the jade scroll on his hands to Zhuo. Master Zhuo, do not refuse yet. Take a look at the formation inside this jade scroll. Finishing, he raised his head to look at Li Yingfeng, who was behind Zhuo, saying warmly, Miss, why don't you put down the messenger seal in your sleeve? Let's not have a disagreement. Zhuo silently thought the other was good. The three, with just a few words, used all kinds of attacks. He instantly could not bear it anymore. Motioning for Li Yingfeng not to be impulsive, he bore the pressure to say, Elder might have had mistaken information. This one had once taken a job of 4th grade cold magnet, but it was only cutting, not processing. The red-robed man's face became slightly dark, saying discontentedly, is Master's one not giving face? Zhuo instantly felt his body freeze, as though he was constrained by something, unable to move. At the side, Li Yingfeng's face was bloodless, staring in shock at the three. Fine. I'll take it. Zhuo saw the situation was worsening and could only grit his teeth and agree. Haha, Master Zhuo is a smart person. Don't worry, if you can successfully process it, this jade scroll, us three people won't let Master Zhuo make a loss. The red-robed male laughed as though nothing had happened. The pressure around Zhuo's body instantly decreased. Looking at this red-robed male, his heart was cold. This person looked warm but, in reality, he was vicious. If he did not successfully process it today, he would have a very bad ending. Wukong Sword Sect was very far from here. If something really did happen, the Shishu from the sect won't get here in time. He didn't go to take the jade scroll, but took the inky black lotus seed. He was not concerned with the jade scroll anymore. It would be lucky if he kept his little life this time. A hint of approval made its way onto the red-robed male's face. The three moved to one side. The eagle-nosed man glanced at Li Yingfeng, his warning implicit. Zhuo did not waste words, and started to inspect this inky black lotus seed. The inky black lotus seed was the fruit of the inky black lotus flower after it bloomed. Inky black lotus was an extremely uncommon ling grass. It usually grew in extremely evil places, like the miasma-filled bogs. After accumulating and absorbing all kinds of poisons over time, its leaves were a rotten white, and the flower was as black as ink. The most valuable was the inky black lotus seed it produced. The inky black lotus would absorb all kinds of poisons that would mix inside its body and produce a new kind of poison. When the lotus produced its seed, all the strong poisons inside its body would gather in this little inky black lotus seed. The lotus seed would land in the peat and once again germinate and grow into a new lotus flower. It would continuously absorb the miasma and poison, forming a new inky black lotus seed. The grade of the inky black seed was determined by the number of cycles it went through. The inky black lotus seed in front of him was 4th grade. That meant that it had gone through 4 cycles of rebirth. That was extremely valuable and rare. The poison inside the lotus seed must be extremely strong. Holding the inky black lotus seed, Zhuo's mouth became dry. This was the first time he was processing such a poisonous ling grass. It would be false to say he was not nervous. The outer coat of the inky black lotus seed was extremely hard. It was also due to this coat, which could not be easily broken by flying swords, that the poison inside did not leak out. Otherwise, Zhuo's fingers would quickly rot and die, the poison would quickly spread and, in a short period of time, he would turn into a pile of bones. Even 3rd grade detoxification Dan could not stop the toxins of the inky black lotus seed. Also, Zhuo's detoxification Dan was only 2nd grade. Li Yingfeng usually took care of the store and naturally had heard of the infamy of the inky black lotus seed. Her face was pale, looking in nervousness at Zhuo. She had let go of the messenger seal inside her sleeve. The eagle-nosed male was staring at her all this time, not disguising the viciousness in his eyes. If she tried to rebel one bit, these people would most likely attack. A criminal that had come out of nowhere. They dared to be so brash in Dong Fu. Li Yingfeng gently bit her lips, full of worry as she looked at Zhua Mo Shidi. The inky black lotus seed was far out of Zhua Mo Shidi's abilities. Last time, he had struggled to cut the 4th grade cold magnet. Processing was much harder than cutting. Even more so, it was an extremely poisonous item. If he was not careful, he would be infected by the poison and die. She noticed that sweat had soaked Shidi's back and her heart reached her throat. If Master was here. Her heart was extremely panicked. If Master could rush over, with his Jindan cultivation, that would be more than enough to deal with 3 Ningmai Shouja. Zhua Mo had the same idea as Li Yingfeng. However, after delaying for a while, noticing the unfriendly glare of the snarling man, Zhua Mo knew he could not delay any longer. Flipping his hand, the stalagmite fire quickly wrapped around the inky black lotus seed. The enmity in the 3 people's eyes finally faded. They were slightly nervous as they stared at Zhua Mo, their feet unconsciously moving towards the doorway. Zhua Mo knew that they were afraid of the poisonous nature of the inky black lotus seed. The toxicity of a 4th grade inky black lotus seed was such that even though the 3 were Ningmai, they could not easily deal with it. Zhua Mo also wanted to throw the inky black lotus seed as far away as possible, but the situation did not permit him to do so. If he could not process this inky black lotus seed today, he might. The milky white flames surrounded the inky black lotus seed, like there was a black core inside the white fire. It looked slightly strange. Zhua Mo steeled his heart, throwing away all his thoughts. He did not have an escape route and should not think of anything else. He focused all his consciousness. His other hand took out 5 pieces of 3rd grade Jingshi, creating a formation under his body. The snarling man looked at the red-robed male. The red-robed male waved his hand. He recognized this formation. It was to replenish Ling power for Shouja. Seeing Zhua Mo act as though he was facing a great enemy, and his movements were practiced and smooth, an expectant expression uncontrollably came over his face. Quickly putting down a 5 primary Ling replenishing formation, Zhua Mo put down his left hand on his knees, his entire body relaxed, his eyes never wavering from the stalagmite fire. The milky white flame, spreading a pressuring cold, surrounded a pure black lotus seed as it bounced quickly. The sweat on his back dried up. After entering the mood, Zhua Mo was not nervous anymore. There was only one thought in his head. How to process this inky black lotus seed. He quickly made a decision because he did not have too many choices. The only method he could think about right now. There was only the 4-turn fire formation that he had just barely touched. Chapter 110, 4-turn fire formation. 3-turn fire formation, that was the formation Zhua Mo had used last time to cut the cold magnet. He hated gossip very much right now. It had clearly just been cutting the cold magnet, but it had spread to becoming processing the cold magnet and caused a calamity for him. Zhua Mo grimaced inside. Without breaking into the stage of Ningmai, to process rare materials like cold magnet and inky black lotus seeds was like a delusion. Even with the 3-turn fire formation, he would not be able to process the 4th grade inky black lotus seed. He closed his eyes, carefully inspecting any change in the inky black lotus seed inside the stalagmite fire. He quickly was disappointed. Shrouded by the stalagmite fire, there was nothing happening on the outer coat of the inky black lotus seed. Taking a deep breath, Zhua Mo's fingers started to flick, smoothly flowing and creating countless afterimages. For the first time, the red-robed male had a shocked expression. The public saw the spectacle, the experts the technique. This string of finger movements was not some complicated finger motions, but it was extremely quick, reaching the stage of fingers evolving into shadows. The fingers evolving into shadows referred to the fact that fast fingers would create dense afterimages, which would be so dense that they would stop for a while in the air, but since the finger movements would not have stopped, before the old afterimages would disappear, new afterimages would form, creating a series of connected afterimages. This was fingers evolving into shadows. Before reaching the stage of Jindan, finger motions were an extremely useful technique. Everyone would know it, but the skill would vary. Unless people cultivated the body, there wouldn't be much of a difference in the strength, flexibility, and power of the fingers. In other words, Ningmai Xiuzhe would have an advantage in terms of Ling power but not in finger motions. Unless there were specialized techniques for finger motions, the only way to increase skill was to keep practicing. The cultivation of this zombie-like youth was extremely average, but his finger movements were amazing. Not just the red-robed male. The other two were also shocked. They exchanged a look, seeing the joy in each other's eyes. Just this string of finger movements was enough for their confidence in Zhuo Mo to increase. Zhuo Mo's mind was blank, his concentration completely gathered. In his eyes, there was only that milky white stalagmite fire, and the inky black lotus seed inside the fire. His fingers became faster. It was like an invisible hand had pushed the spitting stalagmite fire, a string of white fire flying out of the stalagmite fire. The stalagmite fire was like a ball of thread, and this fire thread was the beginning of the thread. White thread was continuously pulled out of the fire. The white fire thread continued to grow longer, the other end always connected to the stalagmite fire. The fire thread started to dance around the inky black lotus seed. The ball of stalagmite fire quickly became smaller. When the last bit of flame turned to become part of the fire thread, the inky black lotus seed was exposed to the air. The white thread of fire was like a nimble white snake, swimming around the inky black lotus seed floating in the air. Zhuo Mo's finger movements suddenly changed. It had been lightning fast before. Now it was as though weights had been tied to his fingers, extremely slow and heavy. The white fire thread broke in the middle, creating two threads. The two threads of fire were like two little white snakes, swimming around the inky black lotus seed. The speed at which the two fire threads moved was twice as fast as before. Strangely, the two fire threads created two intersecting circles but would never touch each other. One-turn fire formation. The inky black lotus seed inside the fire formation was like a rock, with no signs of movement. There was no change in Zhuo Mo's eyes. His 10 fingers continued to change. 2 divided into 4. 4 threads of fire that were smaller than before formed for even smaller crisscrossing fire rings. 2-turn fire formation. The inky black lotus seed was slightly vibrating. Zhuo Mo nervously stared at the inky black lotus seed in the middle of the fire formation, not daring to slip up the tiniest bit. He was not surprised at the situation in front of him. The change in his finger movements became even slower. Opposite that, the speed that the Ling power circuited through his body sped up. 8 threads of fire circled around the inky black lotus seed at astonishing speed, creating a white cage of fire. 3-turn fire formation. Compared to the previous time that he cut the cold magnet, Zhuo Mo's control of the 3-turn fire formation was much better than before. After listening to Pu Yao's advice, Zhuo Mo had started to consciously practice his control of Ling power. Since he had many opportunities to practice every day, he had progressed quickly. The 3-turn fire formation that he had struggled with so much previously was now controlled with ease. Inside the fire formation, the inky black lotus seed was trembling fiercely as though it would jump out of the fire formation at any second. All the people were holding their breath as they stared with serious expressions at the white cage of fire suspended in the air. They all knew what was happening next was the most important step. The coldness of the fire formation had reached an astonishing depth. 8 times the usual temperature of the stalagmite fire. Cold fire was cold, hot fires were hot, but as long as they were fire, they all had one attribute: melt. The melting ability of cold fires would increase the colder it became, the melting ability of the hot fires would become stronger the higher the temperature. The 3-turn fire formation caused the coldness of the stalagmite fire to be 8 times its usual, and its melting ability had also increased by 8 times. Under the 8 times melting ability, the previously unaffected inky black lotus seed finally had a slight change. Small pits started to form on its coat. This was a sign that it was finally melting, but if it was only at this intensity, to process this inky black lotus seed, it would take years. Using the Yao seed, Zuomo's consciousness was extremely cooperative. No one noticed that his body was soft and relaxed as it never had been before. The more relaxed the body, the better the effect of the Mo matrix, and the faster the rate that Ling power would be absorbed. The effect of Zhuo Mo controlling his Ling power in the recent period of time was extremely evident. Forming the 3-turn fire formation only took half of his Ling power. Feeling the Ling power coming from the Ling replenishing formation, Zhuo Mo released a small breath. He had never worked at the same time that he was using a Ling replenishing formation. Based on what he saw, the situation was good. There was a certain level of impurities in the Ling power of the Jingshi. This was not a problem for Zhuo Mo. The Mo matrix could automatically filter out the impurities from the Ling power. The Ling power passed on from the Ling replenishing formation was a steady flow. The Ling power inside Zhuo Mo's body quickly increased. He closed his eyes, maintaining the 3-turn fire formation, motionless as he waited for his Ling power to be replenished to capacity. In the few times he had attempted the 4-turn fire formation, the use of Ling power was astonishing. The red-robed male and his compatriots couldn't help but be nervous at this time as well. They could naturally see that Zhuo Mo was biding his time and gather his energy. It was like the calm before the storm. The calmer it got, the more suffocating it became. The instant that the Ling power in his body reached its maximum, Zhuo Mo opened his eyes. It was like there was 1,000 kadi weight on his fingers as they slowly moved. His weak shoulders shuddered in effort, but the slowly moving fingers were strangely steady. Everyone felt the white light brighten. The cage of fire became even more dense, like a white cocoon of fire. 16 threads of fire, with speeds almost undetectable by the naked eye, circled quickly around the inky black lotus seed. 4-turn fire formation. The Ling power in Zhuo Mo's body furiously was used up. Just forming the 4-turn fire formation, the full Ling power had almost become empty. He couldn't attend to anything else but furiously start to suck in the Ling power from the Ling replenishing formation. Large amounts of Ling power started to stream towards Zhuo Mo. He was like a thirsty traveler in the desert, greedily sucking every drop of Ling power. Under the power of melting multiplied by 16, the hard coat of the inky black lotus seed finally started to melt. All of Zhuo Mo's consciousness started to furiously move. 16 times the melting power. That required that he needed to be extremely precise with his Ling power. Any slack in precision, once it was multiplied by 16, could cause the fire formation to collapse. The 3 males Nliang Feng was so nervous they did not dare to breathe. Inside the store, there was a suffocating silence. These was no sound from the 4-turn formation, but the white fire cocoon would occasionally tremble lightly. Each tremble would cause the 4 people's hearts to tremble. They knew that the tremble was Zhuo Mo having problems controlling the 4-turn fire formation and could not make it do as he wished easily. No one could spare the attention to this point at the moment. On their faces, other than nervousness, there was only shock. Deep shock. A Xiuzhe in the stage of Zhuji was actually able to start a 4-turn fire formation. If it spread out, it would shake all of Dongfu, no, all of Sky Moon Jie. It was basically hard for a Zhuji to complete a 3-turn fire formation. A 4-turn fire formation, that was basically impossible to complete. But this extremely average-looking youth could actually form a 4-turn fire formation. Looking at the dense white cocoon of fire, it was undoubtedly a 4-turn fire formation. They had come when they had heard the news of the cold magnet with an attitude to try. Truthfully, when they had saw Zhuo Mo was only in Zhuji, they had been very disappointed and still had a last hope to try, since ruining a 4th-grade inky black lotus seed was not an easy thing to do. When Zhuo Mo had taken this job in the end, they had wondered what method Suemo would use, but no matter what, they had never thought that Suemo would choose the four-turn fire formation. Four-turn was not a secret formation. It was extremely common. Many people understood it. Even if they understood, there were very few that could use it. The higher the level, the more the required control over Ling power and cultivation would multiply. This kind of increase could only be broken by increases in cultivation stages. To use the three-turn fire formation as an example, if some Zhuji Xiuzhi occasionally managed to complete it, then they definitely could not complete a four-turn fire formation. That was because the requirement it had for control of Ling power and cultivation was double what a three-turn fire formation demanded. Only after breaking through to the stage of Ningmai would a person fulfill the requirements. Yet, something that they assumed could not happen was happening right in front of them. The white fire cocoon occasionally trembled and became unsteady, but it definitely was a four-turn fire formation. The three's eyes as they looked at Suemo was like looking at a monster. Suemo did not know it. Right now, he did not have a bit of attention to spare for anything. His world was only this formation. The little pits on the surface of the inky black lotus seed started to grow larger and deeper, revealing the lotus seed underneath. At this time, Suemo did not dare to slack off even more. This was a glowing and adorable lotus seed, such a beautiful and tempting thing, but it contained terrifying poison. Just touching the tiniest bit, he would die. Suppressing the terror inside, he tried to steady his Ling power. He didn't dare to think of the consequences of the smallest mistake right now. Seeing the glowing and tender lotus seed, the three people back up even more, their expressions filled with wariness and terror. The dangers of the inky black lotus seed was infamous. Chapter 111, For tasty food. The Ling replenishing formation made from 5 pieces of third-grade Jingshi continuously supplied Ling power, but the Ling energy in Suemo's body dropped quickly. The rate of replenishment clearly could not keep up with the speed of use. There was more than one way to form a Ling replenishing formation, but the 5-element Ling replenishing formation was the best he could make. The Ling power entered furiously, and the channels felt a tearing pain. The Ling power that had just entered the channels would be emptied out at double the rate. What followed was a strong feeling of weakness. Tearing and weakness interchanging, even though the Mo matrix had been strengthening his channel, Suemo was almost driven crazy. He knew he could not go crazy, he could not even move a bit. Any tiny movement could cause the fragile four-turn fire formation to collapse. At that time, the glowing and tender lotus seed would lose all its restraints. A colorless and invisible poison would not let go of any person in the room. As the person closest, he naturally would not be immune. Gritting his teeth, a flow of blood dripped from the corner of his mouth silently. Suemo did not detect it. His eyes were widened round as he fixed on the fire cocoon, and the glowing lotus that was revealing its true appearance inside. A light cocoon made up from the crisscross of 16 threads of fire. They released an extremely cold energy, suppressing the toxins of the lotus seed, not letting them escape. As the coat on the lotus seed decreased, the 3 males on the side became even more nervous and their breathing sped up. Poof! The 5 pieces of Jingshi that made up the 5 elements Ling replenishing formation simultaneously turned to 5 blooms of dust. Everyone's expression changed. Had it failed? Amid the stone dust, Suemo gave a shout with all his strength, "Arg!" The moment the fire kokon disappeared, the glowing and tender lotus seed accurately landed into the jade bottle that had appeared at some unknown time in his left hand, his right hand lightening fast as he plugged the top. The mist of dust faded, revealing the sorry figure of Suemo. His hair, face, and body were covered by stone dust. The stream of blood from his mouth, mixed with the stone dust, looked extremely frightening. Success! Suemo's right hand put the jade bottle on the ground in front of him. His voice was raspy and thin, revealing just how weak he was. The red-robed male reached out with a hand and the jade bottle flew to him. After inspecting inside, glee made its way onto his face. He quickly adjusted his expression, first bowing to Mo, Master Zwa is really skilled. Finishing, he put the jade scroll in front of Mo. He thought for a second, and then tilted his head to look at the eagle-nosed male. Do you have the gold forging chapter remnant from last time? The eagle-nosed male nodded, yes. Finishing, he took out a jade scroll from the 100 treasures pouch at his waist, passing it to the red-robed male. The red-robed male also put the gold forging chapter remnant in front of Mo, voice sincere as he said, the discourtesy before, I ask Master Zwa to be generous and forgive us. Us brothers had accidentally came into possession of this jade scroll and it will be our apology. In the future, if we have to trouble Master Zwa, please help us. This person was skilled. Mo thought. The other had made a beautiful move. Even though he had anger inside, but just hearing the name of the jade scroll, Mo knew he could not resist it. He could only grimace, as long as it's not so dangerous as today. Ha ha. Master Zwa is joking. This time, it really was us that was brash. But if we were not so, we would not have seen Master Zwa's astonishing skills. The red-robed male laughed forthrightly. Finishing, he raised his hands in a bow to bid farewell, have a good rest, Master Zwa. We won't disturb you any longer. After the three left, Mo finally took a breath at the departure of the calamity. The left hand that was hidden in the sleeve released the seal soldier. This time, he really had enormous damage. However, looking at the two jade scrolls in front of him, he felt that it was not for nothing. Li Yingfeng, who was frightened to death, hurriedly took out a pile of Ling Dan, urging Mo to go back to Wukong Mountain. This business was too dangerous. The second day, when Li Yingfeng saw Mo, who had been on his last breath yesterday, was jumping around like usual, she was dumbstruck. Shitty looked so weak. Was he just weak on the outside, strong on the inside? The internal injuries were much better than Mo had thought. The MO matrix on his body greatly aided his recovery. He had assumed that he needed to rest for half a month, and had not expected that he would be more than half healed by the second day. Of course, he was still a few days away from complete recovery. Before recovering to his best, he decided to return to the mountain. The tempers of those Ningmai Xiuzha were not very good. If another Ningmai came to the door, it would be terrible. Riding Silly Bird, Mo quickly returned to his little yard. Back at Wukong Mountain, his heart finally landed. Wukong Mountain might be small, but no one dared to come to the mountain to make trouble when the sect leader and others were present. He still had a deep memory of the night that Wei Xingxixiang had entered Juji and the one-sword stroke of Xi and Yen Shibwa that had shocked countless people. A sect that had 4 Jindan at the same time, there were not many of those in Dongfu. It was a pity that Wei Xingxixiang was not in the sect. He felt it was a pity. Finally rid of his enormous debt, and having obtained a large number of jade scrolls, for him, this was a really leisurely time. As he recovered from his injuries, he studied the jade scrolls in his possession. He had a variety of jade scrolls for all topics, but not many of them were high quality. Actually, he did not lack for jade scrolls at the moment. All the jade scrolls in the sect were open for inner sect disciples. Mo could go see Master's records room at any time. Just those jade scrolls, they would take up large amounts of Mo's time. However, the only thing the sect lacked was the formation jade scrolls that Mo needed, so he had to use this method to collect formation jade scrolls. He had gathered many jade scrolls on formations, but they were very disconnected, and not systematic. Mo was not a very picky person. Having so many jade scrolls to learn from, he was already very satisfied. In the high-quality jade scrolls, there was a sword scripture called, Blue Flower. It was extremely fine, but too and soft, suited for females. It was useless in his hands, so Zhuo decided to give this sword scripture to Xiao Guo. Liang Feng Shiji was not practicing sword scriptures now, busy every day with managing business. But when Zhuo ran to the eastern peak, he found out that Xiao Guo had successfully entered Juji, becoming an inner sect disciple, and also entered Shifeng Rong's branch. He hadn't thought the little girl would become his shimmy. When Zhuo found a mountain valley, seeing the apple-shaped wooden sign with Xiao Guo's home written on it, he instantly smiled. There were no Jinji on Xiao Guo's mountain valley. Zhuo easily walked in. When Xiao Guo, who had been practicing her sword, saw Zhuo, she first paused and then had a happy expression. Following that, she timidly said, "Xixiang. Pretty good." Zhuo praised. In reality, from what he saw, Xiao Guo's sword scripture was full of holes, just a pretty appearance. He gave the blue flower sword scriptures to Xiao Guo. "Here, this is for you. You can study it." He asked a few more things and instantly understood. Master was still in seclusion, making dan, and had no time to teach her. Seeing the sweat on the apple face, Zhuo felt he needed to fulfill the duty of a Xixiang and started to point things out. He had practiced sword scriptures for a long time. Even though he was not as skilled as Wei Xing Xixiang, but he had comprehended 2 types of sword essences, and his eyes were much better than people like Qin Cheng. "Your basics are lacking too much." When Zhuo said this, tears instantly flooded Xiao Guo's eyes, but she managed to not cry. "Oh, in the future, you can come to my valley to practice the sword. If I have time, I can look." Zhuo's next words made Xiao Guo smile. In the little west wind yard, Zhuo was sunbathing, eyes closed as he leisurely sat on the chair, swaying as he pondered the jade scroll he memorized in his mind. Not far away from him, Xiao Guo silently practiced the sword, her apple face covered in sweat. On the roof, Silly Bird stood proudly, occasionally using her blue beak to arrange her snowy white feathers. Zhuo, having encountered a problem, had a bad mood, opened his eyes, and saw Silly Bird's smug appearance. His mood instantly worsened. Picking up a stone from the floor, he flickered his hand to throw at Silly Bird. "Show off." Silly Bird gave a shriek, hurriedly flapping her wings to dodge the pebble, eyes full of disdain towards Zhuo. Xiao Guo was startled. When she saw Zhuo pointing and swearing at the blue-beaked snow goose, her large eyes became crescents. Noticing the mirth on Xiao Guo's face, Zhuo gave a cough. He decided to fix the impression of Xixiang and paced alongside to Xiao Guo. "You cannot be distracted when practicing the sword. You have to concentrate to be able." At the side, Xiao Guo wanted to laugh but did not dare, her expression instantly becoming strange. Zhuo did not notice. He shook his head, mimicking Pu Yao's tone as he concluded, "What is more simple than sword scripture? If you practice a few thousand times, you'll know it." Finishing, he waved his hand, "Keep practicing. I'm going for a walk." He then stepped out of the West Wind Valley. After Xiao Guo came every day to Zhuo's place to practice the sword, Zhuo's meals quickly increased in quality. The meat soup simmered, the Ling foods full of Ling energy that increased Zhuo's appetite. The only thing he felt irritating was that Silly Bird would partake as well each time. Especially when Silly Bird found it effective to pretend to be pitiful in front of Xiao Guo. Zhuo could not do anything about it. TSK, her taste certainly must be tender. Walking out of the mountain valley, Pu Yao came out. He licked his lips, looking with some yearning at the interior of the valley. Zhuo was used to the expression that Pu Yao had, "There's lots of people that want to exterminate Yaoma on this mountain. If you aren't afraid of death, go ahead. They can't find me." Pu Yao was confident. "You eat her, I don't have anything to eat, so let's both die." Zhuo also licked his lips. Xiao Guo's skills were really good. Won't eat her. But you can't keep me starving." Pu Yao snorted, I need souls. Didn't you say that the Yin fiends in the sword cave need time to form? Suemo copied Pu Yao in shrugging his shoulders. Pu Yao once again gave a yearning expression, it should be about time today. Let's go hunt a few, and satisfy my craving. Finishing, he did not wait for Suemo to speak before throwing down a few jingsha. The light flashed and Suemo disappeared. Chapter 112, Yin Fiends. It was not the first time that Suemo came to the sword cave, but every time that he came, he would sigh with awe. Who would have thought that inside a mountain cave, there would be such a wondrous world, a fantastical place completely different than the outside. As Pu Yao entered the sword cave, he completely disregarded Suemo, going off by himself to furiously absorb Yin energy. Looking at Pu Yao's intoxicated state, Suemo felt that Yao and people were really different. It wasn't easy to make a trip to the sword cave. Suemo decided to make some more Yin beads. One was that this thing was worth jingsha, the second was that it was needed to make Yin fire beads. Even though he had not tested the power of the Yin fire beads, but Suemo was confident in its power. Something that was so difficult to make, it wouldn't make sense if it didn't have any power. He found a place that had relatively denser Yin energy and was not disturbed by Pu Yao before starting to form Yin beads. Ever since Pu Yao said that all spells were formations, Suemo started to deliberately think in that direction. However, reality was always more complex than theory. Even the simplest spell would have many changes. If the true nature of a spell was really formations, then the difficulty of finding the formation within such numerous and complex changes would be unthinkable. He quickly sunk into the world of exploration. His hands moved erratically, sometimes slow, then fast, without any rhyme or reason. There still was not any expression on his face, his eyes dazed and absent as though his mind was wandering. The Yin energy gathered around his hands would suddenly gather and then spread out, or occasionally collapse. He seemed to not have detected it, his 10 fingers continuously changing like he was bespelled. Pu Yao opened his eyes, and noticed Suemo's state. The Yin energy that was frantically flooding towards his body suddenly paused. He closed his eyes again, the Yin energy in the surroundings moving at even faster speeds towards him. The movements on Suemo's hands slowly started to become ordered. The speed that the Yin energy moved towards his hands started to increase and a Yin bead started to form. When the Yin bead on his hand was fully created, Suemo's soul came back into his body. He put the Yin bead he had just made in front of his eyes, and couldn't help but be disappointed. The Yin bead he had made did not seem different than the Yin beads he had made before. The only difference was that he was the tiniest bit faster this time. It was extremely minuscule. If Suemo hadn't paid close attention, he wouldn't have felt anything. Even though it was an insignificant progress, but it was great motivation for Suemo. He was slightly disappointed, but he knew that for him, studying formations was very difficult for him. At least, this meant that he was working in the right direction. As long as his direction was not wrong, if he slowly walked down this road, he would definitely improve. He had just did an extremely daring but tiny adjustment. It was this adjustment that he didn't even understand himself that had just slightly shortened the time it took for the Yin bead to form. Maybe when my skill at formations is higher, it wouldn't be so difficult, Suemo comforted himself. After this, he didn't spend time on experimenting but focused on forming Yin beads. In one go, he made 30 Yin beads before he stopped. Full of Yin energy, Pu Yao's complexion seemed to be glowing, and he looked extremely satisfied. He floated next to Suemo, go hunt a few Yin fiends. He looked like an extremely greedy child wanting to eat meat. You can go hunt yourself. Suemo asked, slightly puzzled. Pu Yao was much stronger than he was. There was not any reason that he was asking for help. Pu Yao twisted his mouth and said slightly helplessly, if I do it, the taste of the Yin fiends won't be good. Really? Suemo didn't quite believe it. Pu Yao shrugged his shoulders, not explaining. Sui Mo pondered it. It was better not to offend this Ren Yao too much. He was extremely clear how much Pu Yao yearned for souls. Hunting Yin fiends was much better than him going out and killing people for their souls. All right, but you know my strength. Sui Mo reminded Pu Yao. Pu Yao was very excited. It's enough. This crappy place, how strong of a Yin fiend can it produce? TSK, if we managed to get here before your Shixiang came, there might be some good ones. Why? Sui Mo asked in puzzlement. Maybe it was that Sui Mo was going to work, but Pu Yao did not show impatience this time, and explained in great detail, Yin fiends mostly originate from places with dense Yin energy. They are born of Yin energy, and gradually attain a basic intelligence. After continuously absorbing the Yin energy in the surroundings, their intelligence would continuously increase. When they become intelligent, they would naturally have the ability to cultivate, and would continuously purify and cultivate their body. Oh, some strong Yin fiends, in the end, they can cultivate to become Yao. Since they were Yin fiends that cultivated into Yao, since they have natural bodies of pure Yin, they are very difficult to deal with. Sui Mo was slightly surprised. Difficult to deal with, it was very hard to hear something like that from Pu Yao's mouth. Pu Yao continued, however, Yin fiends, since they are born of Yin energy, they need a certain amount of time. Your Shixiang just cleaned out this sword cave. He really is a monster. He didn't leave even one behind. If it wasn't that this sword cave has blood fiends and malicious energies, in addition to Yin energy, Yin fiends wouldn't form this easily. Then he said regretfully, but the time is too short. There wouldn't be anything good. Oh, life is so difficult. Sui Mo felt strange at Pu Yao's regret. He decided to remind Pu Yao, Pu, you aren't a person, you do not have life. One person and one Yao started to travel into the depths of the sword cave. The deeper they went, the denser the Yin energy, and the more pleasure there was in Pu Yao's expression. But landing in Sui Mo's eyes, it seemed very strange. As expected, Yao and people were not the same. The deeper they went, the more Sui Mo's heart shook. The surrounding scenery became even darker and terrifying. Since Sui Mo's consciousness was now stronger, he felt it even more clearly. The coldness that made a person's hair raise up was like countless little worms, burrowing into Sui Mo's body. The blood fiends that flowed beside his feet were even more vibrant and sticky than the outside. Countless malicious thoughts were spread from it. Sui Mo's consciousness had to avoid these malicious thoughts. Thinking that he had almost used his fingers to touch these blood-like liquid, Sui Mo couldn't help but feel fear. Now that he could feel the power of the blood fiends, he found it was definitely something he could not touch presently. Where's the Yin fiend? Sui Mo's voice was slightly trembling. Pu Yao stopped and looked around. He suddenly pointed in one direction, and said excitedly, there, one up ahead. Finishing, he floated ahead. Pu Yao's entire body was eternally floating in the air like a ghost. Sui Mo could only follow behind. A ball of black mist was restlessly turning in the corner. This is the Yin fiend. Sui Mo pointed at the black mist, and asked dumbly. He had heard Pu Yao speak of how terrifying it was, so he hadn't thought it would be a ball of black mist that would look harmless. All Yin fiends that just have formed are like this. It still hasn't formed intelligence. When it has intelligence, the Yin energy around it would solidify. Pu Yao shrugged, the shapes that Yin fiends take the form of will vary, anything is possible. You won't find it strange if you see more. It would be best if I didn't have to see any. Sui Mo uttered. Looking at the constantly changing black ball of mist, he instantly felt it hard to handle. How do I hunt it? Very simple. Just wound it. Pu Yao's eyes were bright, and he expectantly added, serious wound. Sui Mo summoned out the water drop sword. The water drop sword had become even more glowing and soft like a water drop after being continuously nurtured in the Ling spring. After motioning for a bit, he decided to attack. Flowing water. In front of Zhuo, a semi-clear ripple quietly spread out. The water drop sword thrust straight into the Yin Fiend, its sharp point seemed to have thrust it into water. He could clearly feel the resistance coming from the tip of the sword. Hiss. The Yin Fiends suddenly started to move restlessly. Zhuo suddenly felt his head hurt, like a needle piercing his mind. The water drop sword instantly became disorganized. This is the weakest of Yin Fiends. It only knows one move, consciousness stab. It is as weak as it gets. Pu Yao mocked from the side, "Are you not able to even get this one down?" Just at this time, a second consciousness stab came. Zhuo's sword instantly became a mess. His consciousness might have formed, but how to use his consciousness was a problem he had always had a headache about. He had so much spiritual power, but he didn't know how to use it. It really was a waste, to say nothing of using his consciousness to attack or defend. It seemed like someone had forcefully pierced his head twice, his head instantly in throbbing pain. But the attack of the Yin Fiend was invisible and intangible. When his consciousness detected it, the other's attack would have arrived. He basically could not dodge it. Anything related to Pu Yao, it was never anything good, Zhuo wailed inside. The Yin Fiend was relying on its instincts. It had been provoked by the water drop sword. Other than the consciousness stab, it was like an infuriated beast, leaping at Zhuo. Zhuo felt the temperature of the surroundings dramatically increasing, the Yin energy almost tangible as it surrounded him as though it wanted to burrow through his pores inside his body. Zhuo felt countless needles were pricking his body. He couldn't help but howl. "You're really trashy. This kind of Yin Fiend, your crappy Shixiang only needs one sword blow to defeat them." Pu Yao mocked heartlessly from the side. Zhuo didn't have the attention to argue with Pu Yao now. The water drop sword came back to his hand. This time, he did not hesitate. Using all his Ling power, he prepared to give a blow with all his power. However, he was instantly frightened. He suddenly lost control of the Ling power inside his body. The black mist which tightly enclosed his body was like a sponge, furiously absorbing the Ling power inside Zhuo's body. Why was it like this? At this rate, his Ling power would quickly be sucked dry by the Yin Fiend. Consuming Ling. All Yao know how to do it. Oh, this little Yin Fiend doesn't count as a Yao yet. Pu Yao's words really came at a good time, but it was full of disdain towards this Yin Fiend. Zhuo heard Pu Yao's words and his heart jumped. Consuming Ling. Based on the term, it would be consuming Ling power. For some reason, he suddenly thought of Vajra Profound Sutra. At this time, he had no option but to instantly start channeling Vajra Profound Sutra. A golden light suddenly flashed inside the black mist. It was as though a layer of dark gold was layered on Zhuo's entire body. It had an effect. Zhuo clearly felt the loss of Ling power inside his body slow down. The dark golden skin was like a layer of protection, it could stop the loss of his Ling power. Holding the water drop sword, Zhuo did not hesitate any longer, attacking with all his power. Layered wave. The sword rose up, like the start of the tide. As it moved, the waves rose in layers, forming a raging wave. Just at this time, the coldness that had gathered for a long time was like a landslide, erupting out and crashing. The pressure around Zhuo's body instantly lessened. Holding the sword, with him as the center, there was a circle of light blue icicles. The pun here is that life is in Chinese, which is literally human birth. Pu Yao is a Yao, not a human, and so he does not have life. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.